Welcome to Ranger Screams. If you're looking for something to listen to that helps you sleep, or something to listen to while working, then you're in the right place. Before the video starts, make sure to leave a like and write any comment. I reply to all comments. Our goal is to reach as many likes and comments as possible. Thank you for your time. And now let's begin. It was around mid-June in 2008, and the quiet town of Murphy, North Carolina was just starting to show the early signs of summer. I remember it because I'd been working as a small-town cop for a while. Small town meaning most days my biggest issue was breaking up the occasional bar fight at the Rusty Nail or dealing with teenagers tipping over trash cans. I'm Officer Jack Bennett, and while I wasn't born and raised in Murphy, it's the kind of place that gets in your blood. The humidity that June was oppressive, the kind that makes your uniform stick to your back before you even leave the station. Murphy sits nestled between rolling hills and dense forest, the kind of place that tourism brochures describe as charming and quaint. What they don't mention is how the isolation can weigh on you after a while, how the dense tree line of the Nantahala National Forest seems to watch the town with patient, ancient eyes. I've got two kids, Lily and Ben, both under 10, which makes me lucky or a fool depending on how you look at it. Either way, I get most of my excitement from them, which suits me just fine. My wife, Rebecca, always jokes that if I didn't have them to keep me busy, I'd go crazy in this sleepy little town. She wasn't wrong. But then things changed. It wasn't gradual, there wasn't any slow build-up like you might expect in some thriller flick. It all went sideways in one night, and I was neck-deep in something that still has me questioning everything I thought I knew about this place, about myself. That morning had started normally enough. I'd kissed Rebecca goodbye as she headed to her job at the local elementary school. The kids were on summer break, spending the day with Rebecca's mother. I remember the way the sunlight filtered through our kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Everything seemed so ordinary, so safe. My shift started at noon. The station was quiet, just me, Dispatch Officer Carol Jenkins, and Sheriff Dean Miller. The sheriff was a stocky man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that had seen too much during his stint in Desert Storm. He'd moved to Murphy to escape those memories, but sometimes I'd catch him staring into middle distance, his mind clearly elsewhere. Anything I should know about? I asked, settling into my desk chair, the springs protesting loudly. Sheriff Miller shook his head, not looking up from his paperwork. Usual stuff. Mrs. Hendricks called about kids messing with her mailbox again. And Old Man Wilson thinks someone's stealing his newspapers. I nodded, suppressing a smile. This was Murphy. Predictable, safe, mundane. The afternoon crawled by. I drove through town, nodding at familiar faces. I broke up an argument between two farmers at the general store, wrote up a report about a minor fender bender in the grocery store parking lot, and stopped by the school to give a quick talk on bike safety to the summer program kids. The sun was starting to set when I swung by home to grab dinner with the family. Rebecca had made pot roast, and the kids were excited to tell me about their day with Grandma. Ben had caught a frog in the backyard, and Lily had drawn me a picture of our family standing in front of our house. Simple joys, the kind you don't appreciate enough until they're gone. You working late tonight? Rebecca asked as I helped clear the table. Yeah, patrol until midnight. Sheriff's got me checking the outskirts near the forest. She frowned slightly. Rebecca always worried when I patrolled near the forest, not because it was particularly dangerous, just the opposite. It was so isolated out there that if something did happen, backup would be a long time coming. Be careful, she said, her hand lingering on mine a moment longer than usual. Looking back, I wonder if she somehow sensed what was coming. I kissed her and the kids goodbye, promising to wake Lily when I got home so she could show me her new stuffed animal. God, how normal it all was. How safe I felt in the rhythm of our lives. By 9 p.m., I was back in my cruiser, patrolling near Murphy's outskirts, close to the Nantahala National Forest. The forest was dense, a sea of towering pines and oaks stretching far beyond what you could see from the main road. Murphy wasn't much to look at, just a couple of gas stations, a diner, and a few mom-and-pop shops. But the forest, it was a beast. The night was unusually dark. Cloud cover had moved in, blotting out the stars and the waxing moon. My headlights cut through the darkness, but seemed feeble against the wall of trees that lined the road. This part of the route always made me uneasy. The forest pressed close to the road here, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. People went hiking or camping there all the time, and every once in a while we'd get a call about some out-of-towner who thought they could handle the wilderness and ended up lost or stranded. The forest had a way of making you feel small, insignificant. I'd grown up in Charlotte, where the tallest things around were buildings, not ancient trees that had stood for hundreds of years. I'd just passed the old logging road when my radio crackled to life. Unit 4. This is dispatch. Over. I picked up the handset. This is Unit A. Go ahead, dispatch. Carol's voice came through, tinged with the slight concern that always colored her tone when something unusual happened in Murphy. Jack, we've got reports of gunshots out near the forest, close to the Frederickson property. Caller said they heard at least 3 shots about 5 minutes ago. My stomach tightened. It wasn't hunting season, so that made it unusual. Murphy wasn't exactly a crime hotspot, but the sound of gunfire had a way of stirring up bad memories for the few of us on the force who'd seen action before wearing the badge. Copy that. I'm about 10 minutes out. Any other details? Negative. Just the gunshots. No visual on a suspect or vehicle. 10-4. I'll check it out and report back. As I hung up the radio, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. My mind immediately went to poachers or some kids playing with their daddy's rifle. Routine, right? I could deal with that. I pulled the cruiser off the main road and took the gravel path up toward Old Man Frederickson's property. Frederickson owned a good chunk of land bordering the forest, and he was as ornery as they came. One of those get-off-my-lawn types who wouldn't hesitate to pull a shotgun on anyone dumb enough to trespass. Maybe it was him getting trigger-happy again. The gravel crunched under my tires as I made my way up the winding path. The trees seemed to close in around me, branches scraping against the sides of my cruiser like skeletal fingers. I'd driven this road 100 times before, but tonight it felt different. Oppressive, as if the forest itself was warning me to turn back. I switched on my spotlight, sweeping it across the dense undergrowth on either side of the road. The beam caught the glint of eyes, probably a deer or raccoon, before they vanished into the darkness. The road curved sharply to the right, and as I rounded the bend, my headlights illuminated Frederickson's cabin in the distance. It was a squat, weathered structure built back in the 70s according to Frederickson. No lights shone from within. That wasn't unusual. The old man often went to bed early, but something about the darkened windows made my skin prickle. I slowed the cruiser, scanning the area. Frederickson's beat-up pickup was parked at an odd angle near the cabin, as if he'd pulled in hastily. As I got closer to the property, something felt off. The usual chorus of crickets and nightbirds had gone silent. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, felt heavy. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the tall trees seemed to swallow the light, leaving nothing but inky shadows in every direction. I brought the cruiser to a stop about 50 yards from the cabin and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm at the Frederickson property. No sign of activity yet. I'm going to check it out. Copy that, Unit 4. Be careful out there. I stepped out of the cruiser, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounding way too loud in the stillness. Drawing my flashlight, I swept it across the yard. Frederickson's front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the gentle breeze. That wasn't like him at all. The old man was paranoid about security, always double-checking his locks. My hand moved instinctively to my holster, unsnapping the safety strap. "Mr. Frederickson?" I called out. "This is Officer Bennett. Everything okay in there?" No response. Just the soft creak of the door as it moved back and forth. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. Something big and unnatural moving between the trees at the edge of Frederickson's property. At first I thought it was a bear. Hell, it had to be a bear. But this thing was too tall, too fast. It was moving on 2 legs, hunched over, but with a kind of unnatural speed that chilled me to the core. Bears don't move like that. I kept my flashlight trained on the spot where I'd seen it, half expecting some drunk local in a ghillie suit to pop out laughing. But nothing came. No noise, no rustling, just silence. I radioed into dispatch, letting them know I was investigating a possible poacher, but left out the part about seeing what I'd seen. I didn't want to sound like a jackass. 10-4, Carol responded as usual. But that's where normal ended. I stood there for a long moment, my breath forming small clouds in the increasingly cold night air. The sensation of being watched pressed down on me like a physical weight. Whatever I'd seen, it was still out there, watching, waiting, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life was about to change forever. I stepped forward cautiously, gripping my sidearm. Whatever it was, it had gone deeper into the woods. Something told me I shouldn't follow, but curiosity is a hell of a drug, isn't it? And I wasn't about to back down from something I couldn't explain. The beam from my flashlight seemed to penetrate only a few feet into the dense undergrowth. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of darkness punctuated by the ghostly silhouettes of ancient pines. I glanced back at my cruiser, its solid presence a comfort in the gathering gloom. For a split second, I considered getting back inside, locking the doors, and calling for backup. Instead, I keyed my radio again. Dispatch, I'm going to check the tree line. Saw something moving out there. Copy that, Jack. Want me to send the sheriff your way? Carol's voice had an edge to it now. Negative. Probably just a deer or something. I'll be fine. I clicked off before she could protest. The closer I got to the tree line, the more the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the car, drive away, and never think about this again. But I kept going, one foot in front of the other, heart pounding in my chest. The first row of trees felt like a boundary, a threshold between the world I knew and something altogether different. The air was noticeably colder here, carrying the musty scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic. I swept my flashlight in a wide arc, revealing nothing but more trees, their bark glistening with evening dew. I took another step, and another, moving deeper into the forest. The canopy above blocked what little moonlight managed to filter through the clouds, plunging me into near total darkness save for my flashlight beam. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted with years of fallen pine needles that muffled my footsteps. 20 yards in, I stopped to listen. Nothing. Not even the sound of wind through the branches, just the ragged sound of my own breathing and the distant, barely perceptible hum of nighttime insects. I was about to turn back when I caught a whiff of something that didn't belong. The unmistakable coppery stench of blood. My training kicked in. I drew my gun, holding it alongside my flashlight in a practice stance. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and ineffectual in the vast darkness. "Murphy Police Department. Is anyone there?" The words hung in the air, unanswered. I moved forward cautiously, following the strengthening smell. The beam of my flashlight caught something unnatural on the ground ahead. A splash of color against the forest floor. Red. Dark red. That's when I found the body. It wasn't Fredrickson, thank God, but it was bad enough. A man, probably in his 40s, lay face down in the dirt. I didn't recognize him, not a local then. He was wearing hiking gear, sturdy boots, cargo pants, a flannel shirt now so soaked with blood it appeared black in my flashlight beam. His clothes were torn to shreds, blood soaking the ground around him. Whatever had attacked him hadn't gone for a clean kill. No, this thing had ripped him apart like a kid tearing open a Christmas present. I knelt down, checking for a pulse out of instinct, but there was no point. The guy's chest was open, organs exposed like some kind of macabre biology lesson. My stomach lurched, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't about to lose it here, not now. The man's face was turned away from me, pressed into the soft earth. His right arm was outstretched, fingers curled as if he'd been reaching for something. I followed the direction of his arm and saw a backpack a few feet away, its contents spilled across the ground. A water bottle, a map, a small first aid kit, and a handgun, a Smith & Wesson revolver. I picked it up carefully. 3 rounds had been fired, so these were the gunshots we'd heard. But what had he been shooting at? And what kind of animal could do this kind of damage to a grown man? I carefully placed the revolver back where I'd found it, not wanting to disturb the scene any more than necessary. Standing up, I turned in a slow circle, scanning the surrounding area with my flashlight. The beam caught something reflective about 10 yards away, a trail of blood droplets leading deeper into the forest. My police training told me to secure the scene, call for backup, and wait. But something else, something primal, told me I needed to know what this man had encountered. Then I heard it. The soft crunch of leaves behind me. I whipped around, gun drawn, and there it was. This thing, this creature, was nothing like anything I'd seen before. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its skin dark and mottled, like it was covered in patches of fur and scales. Its limbs were too long for its body, arms hanging almost to the ground, and its face, hell, if you could call it that, was twisted. Its mouth was wide, filled with jagged teeth, and it let out this low, rumbling noise that rattled me to my core. It reminded me of a wolf, or maybe some kind of big cat, but distorted, like something out of a nightmare. Time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail of the creature with unnatural clarity, the way its chest heaved with each breath, the viscous saliva dripping from its jaws, the strange amber glow of its eyes fixed directly on me. There was intelligence in those eyes, a cold, calculating awareness that no animal should possess. It moved fast, way faster than anything that big had any right to. I didn't think, I just fired. The gunshot echoed through the trees, loud and sharp. The creature staggered back, but it didn't fall. I squeezed off 2 more rounds, this time hitting it in what I thought was the chest, but it barely flinched. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized how deep in I was. The creature recovered quickly, lowering itself into a crouch, those amber eyes never leaving mine. I backed up slowly, keeping my weapon trained on the thing, but it didn't charge me. It just stood there, watching. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it bolted, disappearing into the thick of the woods. I stood frozen, my gun still raised, aiming at the spot where the creature had been. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip on the weapon. Sweat poured down my face despite the chill in the air. What the hell had I just seen? The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. A bear with mange. A feral human who'd been living in the woods. Some kind of escaped exotic animal. But none of those explanations fit what I'd witnessed. This was something else entirely. I backed away slowly, not turning my back to the direction the creature had gone, until I felt the trunk of a large tree behind me. I leaned against it, trying to gather my thoughts. The dead hiker lay a few yards away, a stark reminder that what I'd seen was very real and very dangerous. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Unit 4, this is dispatch. Status check, over. I fumbled for the radio, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. This is Unit 4, I need backup at the Fredrickson property ASAP. Got a 1091D and a 1054. Animal attack and dead body. 10-4, Unit 4. Backup is on the way. ETA 15 minutes. Can you provide details? I hesitated. What could I possibly say? That I'd seen some kind of monster straight out of a horror movie? That I'd fired 3 rounds at it and it had barely noticed? Male victim, mid-40s, severe lacerations consistent with animal attack. I discharged my weapon at the animal, but it fled into the woods. Approach with caution. Copy that. Sheriff Miller is en route with Deputies Holt and Rivera. Are you safe, Jack? Was I? I scanned the darkness surrounding me, the flashlight beam seeming pathetically inadequate against the vast blackness. Affirmative. I'm returning to the victim's location to secure the scene. I made my way back to the dead hiker, every sense on high alert. The forest seemed different now, threatening, as if the trees themselves were watching me. I kept my gun drawn, turning at the slightest sound. Back at the body, I forced myself to look more closely at the wounds. The lacerations were deep and jagged, but there was something odd about them. They didn't look like claw marks, more like the flesh had been torn by something with incredible strength. And the pattern, it was almost methodical, not the frenzied attack you'd expect from a predator. I noticed something clutched in the man's left hand, a small, leather-bound notebook. Carefully, I pried it from his stiff fingers. The cover was stained with blood, but the pages inside were mostly intact. I flipped through it quickly. It appeared to be a journal, filled with neat handwriting and small sketches. Most of it was mundane hiking observations, but the last few entries caught my eye. May 30. Locals in town talking about strange noises in the forest at night. Most blame coyotes or feral hogs, but old-timer at the bar mentioned something called the Walker. Said it's been haunting these woods for generations. June 2, 3rd day of hiking. Found unusual tracks near the eastern ridge. Too large for bear, strange gait pattern. Will investigate further tomorrow. June 4. Heard something following me today. Never got a clear look. Setting up camp near Fredrickson property tonight. Will attempt to capture evidence. June 5. It's close. Can hear it breathing outside my tent. Not animal breathing, something else. If anyone finds this. The entry ended abruptly. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my pocket, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. The hiker had been tracking something, the same thing that ultimately killed him. In the distance, I heard the wail of approaching sirens. Backup was almost here. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. What was I going to tell them? The truth seemed impossible, yet I couldn't deny what I'd seen. As the sirens grew louder, I cast one final glance into the darkness of the forest. Something moved between the trees, just a flicker of motion, there and gone. But I knew it was watching, waiting, and somehow I knew this was just the beginning. The flashing blue and red lights cut through the darkness as 3 patrol cars pulled up to Fredrickson's property. I'd made my way back to the edge of the forest, standing like a sentinel between the dead hiker and whatever was lurking in those woods. My uniform was stained with blood and dirt, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling no matter how tightly I clenched them. Sheriff Miller was the first to approach, his weathered face grim in the harsh glare of the headlights. Deputies Holt and Rivera flanked him, hands resting on their holsters, eyes scanning the tree line nervously. "Bennett," the sheriff acknowledged, his voice gruff. "What the hell happened out here?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? Even now, standing in the reassuring presence of my colleagues, the creature seemed like something from a fever dream, a nightmare that couldn't possibly exist in the rational world. "There's a body," I said finally, gesturing toward the woods. "Male hiker, mid-40s. It's bad, Sheriff." Miller nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the animal, gone. I fired 3 shots, but it disappeared into the forest." "What kind of animal are we talking about here?" Deputy Rivera asked, her dark eyes narrowed. "Bear? Mountain lion?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. It was dark. Big, though. Bigger than any bear I've ever seen." Sheriff Miller studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to read between the lines. Finally, he turned to the deputies. "Holt, call in forensics and the medical examiner. Rivera, get the perimeter secured. I don't want anyone going in or out of these woods until we know what we're dealing with." As they moved to follow his orders, Miller gestured for me to follow him back to his vehicle. Once we were out of earshot, he turned to me, his voice low and intense. "What really happened out here, Jack? And don't give me the sanitized version." I looked into the sheriff's eyes, searching for some indication of how he might react to the truth. We'd worked together for 3 years, but in that moment I realized how little I really knew about Dean Miller. "Sheriff, I started, then steeled myself. What I saw wasn't normal. It wasn't an animal, at least not any kind I've ever seen. It was something else." Miller's expression didn't change. "Go on." "It was huge, walking on 2 legs. Had these long arms, almost to the ground. And its face—" I shuddered at the memory. It didn't look natural. I shot it, point-blank range, and it barely reacted. I expected skepticism, maybe even concern for my mental state. Instead, Miller's face seemed to age 10 years in an instant. He glanced toward the forest, then back at me. "Did it make any sound?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "Yeah, a sort of rumbling growl, low-pitched, but loud." "Why?" Miller didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flask, taking a long swig before offering it to me. I accepted gratefully, the whiskey burning a fiery trail down my throat. "There are things in these woods, Jack," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Things that don't make sense. I've heard stories since I moved here. Dismissed them as local superstition, ghost stories to scare the tourists. But what?" I pressed when he fell silent. "But this isn't the first time something like this has happened." He took the flask back, staring at it as if it might contain answers. 1993, 3 hunters disappeared in the eastern part of the forest. They found 2 of the bodies a week later, torn apart, just like your hiker. The 3rd was never recovered. A chill ran down my spine. What did they think did it? Officially? Bear attack. Miller's laugh was hollow. Unofficially? No one knew. But there were tracks found nearby. Not bear tracks. Not anything anyone could identify. Before I could respond, Deputy Holt approached, his young face taut with tension. "Medical examiner's on the way, Sheriff. ETA 20 minutes. Forensics might take longer." Miller nodded. "All right. Let's get some lights set up at the scene. I want a full sweep of the area at first light." As Holt walked away, Miller turned back to me. "Show me the body." We made our way back to where the hiker lay, the beam of our flashlights casting long, grotesque shadows across the forest floor. The blood looked black in the artificial light, soaking into the earth in a wide radius around the corpse. Miller knelt beside the body, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "Jesus," he muttered. "What kind of force does it take to do something like this?" "More than any normal animal should have," I replied, thinking of how easily the creature had shrugged off my bullets. The sheriff stood, wiping his hands on his pants. "We need to keep this quiet for now. If word gets out that there's some kind of killer animal in the forest, we'll have panic on our hands. Don't people have a right to know if there's something dangerous out there?" Miller fixed me with a hard stare. "And what exactly would we tell them, Jack? That there's some kind of monster roaming the woods? We don't even know what we're dealing with yet." He had a point, but it didn't sit well with me. Still, I nodded my agreement. For now, at least, we'd keep the details under wraps. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The medical examiner arrived, Dr. Paula Chen, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen it all in her 20 years of service. Even she seemed taken aback by the state of the hiker's body. "These wounds," she murmured, examining the torn flesh with gloved hands. "They're unusual, not consistent with any predator I'm familiar with." "Bear could do this kind of damage," Miller suggested, though I could tell he didn't believe it himself. Dr. Chen looked skeptical. "A bear would leave distinct claw marks. These are more like..." tears, as if something grabbed the tissue and pulled it apart. The forensics team arrived shortly after, combing the area for evidence. They found what I'd already discovered, the hiker's gun, his scattered belongings. But they also found something else. A strange viscous substance on a nearby tree trunk. Might be from whatever attacked him, the lead technician said, carefully collecting a sample. Never seen anything quite like it. Almost like mucus, but thicker. I thought of the saliva I'd seen dripping from the creature's jaws and felt my stomach turn. As the night wore on, more unsettling discoveries were made. The hiker wasn't the only victim. About 100 yards deeper into the forest, they found another body. A woman, also dressed for hiking. Her remains were in even worse condition, as if she'd been dead longer, and beyond her, partially hidden beneath a fallen log, a third victim, a male, probably in his 30s. I called in backup, half expecting them to laugh me off the radio, but when they arrived and saw the bodies, their faces turned as pale as mine must have been. We didn't talk about what I'd seen, at least not at first, but as they bagged up the bodies, I could see the question in their eyes, the same question running through my head. What the hell did that? By dawn, we'd found a total of 4 bodies scattered throughout this section of the forest. The fourth was so badly decomposed that identification would be difficult. All showed the same pattern of injuries. Massive trauma. Tissues torn rather than cut or clawed. After the forensics team showed up, we found more bodies. 3, to be exact, all of them shredded in the same brutal fashion. Whoever or whatever had done this wasn't human, that much was clear. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, Sheriff Miller gathered the team for a briefing. His face was haggard, eyes red-rimmed from a night without sleep. "Here's what we know," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "We have 7 victims, all found within a half-mile radius of the Fredrickson property. Preliminary examinations suggest they died over a period of several days, possibly weeks. Cause of death appears to be massive trauma consistent with an animal attack." "What kind of animal?" Deputy Rivera asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Miller hesitated. "At this time, we're operating under the assumption that it's a bear, possibly rabid or injured, which would explain the unusual attack pattern." I couldn't help myself. "A bear didn't do this, Sheriff." All eyes turned to me. Miller's gaze hardened. "Do you have an alternative theory you'd like to share with the group, Officer Bennett?" The challenge in his voice was clear. We'd agreed to keep the details of what I'd seen quiet. But standing there, surrounded by my colleagues who were about to go back into those woods to search for more victims, I couldn't stay silent. "I saw what did this," I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my gut. "It wasn't a bear. It wasn't any kind of animal I've ever seen." The silence that followed was deafening. Deputy Holt shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances with Rivera. Dr. Chen stopped writing in her notebook, her pen poised midair. "Officer Bennett had a traumatic experience last night," Miller said finally, his tone dismissive. "He discharged his weapon at what he believed was the animal responsible, but in the darkness and stress of the moment, his perceptions may have been altered." The implication was clear. I wasn't to be trusted. The anger that flared in me was sudden and hot. "I know what I saw," I insisted. "And whatever it was, bullets didn't stop it. If you're sending people back into those woods, they need to know what they're up against." Miller's expression darkened. "That's enough, Bennett. Take the rest of the day off. Get some rest. You've had a long night." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in Miller's eyes stopped me. This wasn't the time or place. I nodded stiffly and turned to leave, feeling the weight of curious gazes on my back. As I walked back to my cruiser, Dr. Chen fell into step beside me. She waited until we were out of earshot before speaking. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I've been a medical examiner for over 20 years. I've seen bear attacks, mountain lion attacks, even attacks by packs of feral dogs. This," she gestured toward the forest, "this is something different." I studied her face, finding no trace of mockery or disbelief. "You believe me?" She shrugged. "I believe the evidence. And the evidence doesn't support a normal animal attack. Whatever did this had strength beyond anything in these woods. And the pattern? It's almost..." She hesitated. "Almost what?" "Almost deliberate," she finished. "Like it wasn't just killing for food, like it was, I don't know, studying them, taking them apart to see how they worked." The implication sent ice through my veins. I thought of those amber eyes, the intelligence I'd seen in them. Not animal. Something else. Dr. Chen squeezed my arm. "Be careful, Bennett, and watch your back." Miller isn't telling everything he knows. With that cryptic warning, she turned and walked back to the crime scene, leaving me alone with thoughts darker than the forest depths at midnight. The sheriff wanted to sweep it under the rug. Animal attack, he said. Probably a bear, but I knew better. No bear moves like that. No bear looks like that. I pushed back, demanding more resources, but the higher-ups weren't having it. We don't want to start a panic, they told me. Keep it quiet. Yeah, right, like that was going to happen. I drove home in a daze, the events of the night replaying in my mind on an endless loop. The creature's face, the dead hikers, Miller's strange reaction, Dr. Chen's warning. None of it made sense, yet all of it was terrifyingly real. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Rebecca standing at the window, her face etched with concern. I hadn't called, hadn't let her know I was okay. The sun was fully up now. I'd been gone all night. She met me at the door, pulling me into a tight embrace. Jack, what happened? Carol called and said there was some kind of animal attack in the forest. Said you'd found bodies. I held her tightly, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. For a moment, I allowed myself to be comforted by her presence, by the normality of our home. But the images from the forest wouldn't fade. It's bad, Becca, I murmured. Really bad. She pulled back, studying my face with concern. Are you hurt? There's blood on your uniform. Not mine, I assured her. It's been a long night. She led me to the kitchen, sitting me down at the table while she made coffee. I was grateful for her quiet understanding, for the way she didn't press me for details I wasn't ready to share. The kids? I asked, suddenly remembering it was a school day. Mom took them to school. I called in sick when I heard what was happening. She placed a steaming mug in front of me, then sat across the table, her hands wrapping around her own cup. Do you want to talk about it? Did I? Part of me wanted to unburden myself, to tell her everything I'd seen and felt. But another part, the protective husband and father, wanted to shield her from the horror that had invaded our peaceful town. There were hikers in the forest, I said finally. Something attacked them, something not normal. Rebecca's brow furrowed. A bear? That's what Miller wants everyone to think. But you don't believe that. I met her gaze, seeing the question there. How much should I tell her? How much could she handle? No, I said simply. I don't. She reached across the table, taking my hand. Jack, you're scaring me. I'm scared too, Becca. The admission came easier than I expected. What I saw last night, I can't explain it, can't rationalize it, but it was real. And it's still out there. Then we should leave, she said immediately, her grip on my hand tightening. Take the kids and go stay with my sister in Asheville until they catch this thing. The offer was tempting. So tempting that for a moment I considered it seriously. Pack up the family, drive away from Murphy, and never look back. But then I thought of the dead hikers, of Fredrickson alone in his cabin on the edge of the woods, of a town full of people who had no idea what lurked in the forest. I can't leave, I said softly. Not yet. This is my job, Becca. These people rely on me. She withdrew her hand slowly, her expression closing off. And what about the people who rely on you here? Lily and Ben need their father. I need my husband. It's not that simple, isn't it? Her voice had an edge now. Jack, whatever is out there, it's not your personal responsibility. Let Miller handle it. Let the state wildlife people handle it. Come back to us. I wanted to explain that it wasn't that simple, that having seen the creature, I couldn't just walk away. But exhaustion was crashing over me in waves, making coherent thought difficult. I need sleep, I said, standing up. We can talk about this later. Rebecca's face softened. Go, get some rest. I'll wake you if anything happens. I trudged upstairs, stripping off my blood-stained uniform and stepping into the shower. The hot water couldn't wash away the memories, but it eased some of the physical tension from my body. By the time I collapsed into bed, I was already drifting, my consciousness slipping away before my head hit the pillow. But sleep brought no peace. In my dreams, I wandered through an endless forest, pursued by a shadow I could never quite see. Its breathing echoed all around me, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. And when I finally turned to face it, I saw not the creature from the woods, but my own reflection, twisted and inhuman, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. I woke with a start, heart hammering against my ribs. The room was dark. I'd slept the day away. Rebecca lay beside me, her breathing deep and even. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, marking the passage of ordinary time in a world that had suddenly become anything but ordinary. Carefully, so as not to wake her, I slipped out of bed and went to the window. From here I could see the edge of the forest, a dark line against the night sky. Was it out there now, watching, hunting? How many more bodies would we find before this was over? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number. We need to talk about what you saw. Waffle House, 30 minutes. Come alone. Dr. C. I stared at the message, Chen's warning from earlier echoing in my mind. Miller isn't telling everything he knows. What did she know? What answers could she possibly have that would make sense of the nightmare I'd witnessed? Only one way to find out. I dressed quietly in the dark, scribbled a note for Rebecca in case she woke, and slipped out of the house into the waiting night. Whatever truths awaited me at that late-night diner, I was about to discover that some questions are better left unasked, and some answers are worse than not knowing at all. The Waffle House sat like a lonely island of light in the darkness of the highway, its fluorescent glow spilling onto the empty parking lot. At this hour, just past midnight, the place was nearly deserted. A long-haul trucker nursed a coffee at the counter, while a waitress wiped down tables with mechanical efficiency. Dr. Chen sat in a booth at the far end, her back to the wall, eyes tracking my approach. She looked different out of her medical examiner's gear, smaller somehow, more vulnerable in a simple gray sweater and jeans, but her gaze was as sharp and clinical as ever. "You came," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. Your text wasn't exactly something I could ignore." I kept my voice low. "What's this about, Dr. Chen? What do you know?" She pushed a mug of coffee toward me. "Paula, please. And I know that Sheriff Miller is hiding something big." The waitress approached, but Chen waved her away with a practiced smile. Once she was out of earshot, Chen leaned forward. "After you left, we found more evidence. Tracks, for one thing. Like nothing I've ever seen before. Too big for any known predator, unusual gait pattern. And that substance we found on the trees? Preliminary analysis shows it contains proteins not consistent with any local wildlife." I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, grateful for its warmth. "Did you tell Miller?" "Of course. You know what he said? File it as inconclusive." Then he called the state wildlife department and told them we had a rogue bear, possibly rabid. "A cover-up," I murmured. "But why?" Chen reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. "Because this isn't the first time." I opened the folder to find a stack of newspaper clippings, most yellowed with age. The headlines jumped out at me. 3 hikers missing in Nantahala Forest, 1993. Campers found dead. Authorities blame bear attack, 1979. Local man claims monster stalking woods, 1964. 5 dead in forest massacre. Wild animal suspected, 1952. I flipped through the articles, a chill settling in my bones. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 15 to 20 years, a series of brutal killings in or near the Nantahala Forest, each time attributed to animal attacks despite evidence to the contrary. "Where did you get these?" I asked, looking up at Chen. "I have a friend at the county archives. Called in a favor." She sipped her coffee. "Miller knows about this pattern. He has to. But he's deliberately keeping it quiet." "But why? If this thing has been killing people for decades, why hide it?" Chen shook her head. "I don't know. But there's more." She pulled another document from her bag, a photocopy of what looked like an old journal entry. The handwriting was faded, but still legible. "March 12, 1952, it walks again. The elders say it is punishment for our sins, for building our town on stolen land. They say it will not rest until it has claimed its due. 7 souls, always 7. Then it will sleep, until the cycle begins anew. We cannot kill it. We cannot stop it. We can only endure, and pray it passes us by." My mouth went dry. 7 victims, like what we found today. Chen nodded grimly. This was written by a local pastor. His church was just outside Murphy, near where the forest is now. The land was different then, less developed, more wild. But the pattern is the same. "You're saying this thing, whatever it is, has been here for at least 70 years? Killing on some kind of cycle? Longer, I think. There are references to similar incidents going back to the early 1900s, though the records get spotty the further back you go." Chen leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "The local Cherokee have legends about a creature in these woods. They called it the hunger that walks, a spirit of insatiable appetite that takes human form to hunt." I thought of the creature I'd seen, its twisted, almost human-like face, its intelligence, the way it had watched me with those amber eyes. "I don't believe in monsters," I said. But the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Neither did I." Chen's smile was bitter. "But I believe in evidence. And the evidence says there's something in those woods that defies conventional explanation. A heavy silence fell between us. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the window before going dark. Neither of us paid it much attention. "What's our next move?" I asked finally. "I'm continuing my analysis of the evidence. The substance we found, the unusual proteins, maybe there's a scientific explanation after all. Some kind of mutation, a new predator species." She didn't sound convinced. "As for you, be careful. Miller knows you saw something. He'll be watching you." "I need to warn people," I said. "If this thing has some kind of pattern, if it's going to kill more people." "And tell them what?" Chen interrupted. "That there's a monster in the woods? A creature from Cherokee legend that wakes up every couple of decades to go on a killing spree? They'll think you're crazy, so we do nothing? Just let it keep hunting?" Chen reached across the table, her small hand covering mine. "Not nothing. We gather evidence. We build a case Miller can't ignore. And we watch each other's backs." The bell above the door jingled as someone entered the diner. Both of us tensed, then relaxed as an elderly couple shuffled in, taking seats at the counter. "Not Miller, not yet." "There's something else," Chen said, gathering her papers. "The hiker whose body you found first. We identified him. Dr. Marcus Reed, cryptozoologist from UNC Chapel Hill. He was in Murphy researching local legends, specifically legends about creatures in the forest." The implications hit me like a physical blow. He knew. He was looking for it, and it found him instead. Chen stood, tucking the folder back into her bag. "Be careful who you trust, Jack, and watch your back." With that, she left a few bills on the table and walked out, the door swinging shut behind her. I sat there long after she'd gone, staring into my cooling coffee, the weight of what I'd learned pressing down on me like a physical thing. 7 souls, always 7. Then it will sleep, until the cycle begins anew. We'd found 7 bodies in the forest. Did that mean the killing was over, or was the count incomplete? And if so, who would be next? A few days later, Fredrickson turned up dead too. Same MO, ripped apart, barely recognizable. That's when people started leaving town, fast, and can you blame them? The news spread like wildfire, despite the sheriff's attempts to control the narrative. The official story was still a rogue bear, possibly rabid or injured, but no one was buying it. Not after what happened to Fredrickson. I was off duty when the call came in. A neighbor had gone to check on the old man after not seeing any activity at his cabin for a couple of days. What she found sent her screaming back to her car. By the time I arrived at the scene, Miller and his deputies had already cordoned off the area. The sheriff's expression was grim as he intercepted me at the police tape. "You shouldn't be here, Bennett. You're off this case." "The hell I am," I growled, trying to see past him to the cabin. "This is my beat, Sheriff, and after what I saw in those woods..." "Exactly," Miller's voice was low, intense. "After what you think you saw, you're too close to this. Go home, Jack. Be with your family." Something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't just dismissal. There was genuine concern there. And something else. Fear. "What happened to Fredrickson?" I demanded. Miller hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Same as the others, torn apart in his own home. But this was different, more savage. Like it was angry or desperate," I suggested. "If it's following some kind of pattern, maybe Fredrickson was the last one it needed." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? What pattern?" I realized too late that I'd slipped. Chen's research wasn't something I was supposed to know about. "Just a theory," I said quickly. 7 victims in the forest, now Fredrickson. Seems deliberate." Miller studied me for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "Go home, Jack," he repeated, but his tone had changed. There was an edge to it now, a warning. "Sheriff, that's an order, Officer Bennett. Or do I need to place you on administrative leave?" The threat was clear. I backed down, not because I was afraid of losing my job, but because I needed to stay on the inside if I was going to figure out what was happening in Murphy. "Fine," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "But this isn't over." "No," Miller agreed, his gaze drifting toward the forest looming beyond Fredrickson's property. "I don't think it is." By the time I got home, the news about Fredrickson had spread throughout town. Rebecca met me at the door, her face pale with worry. "Is it true?" she asked. "About old man Fredrickson?" I nodded, too tired to sugarcoat it. "Yeah, it's bad, Becca." She pulled me inside, checking the locks on the door with newfound paranoia. "They're saying it was the same animal that killed those hikers, that it broke into his house." "That's what they're saying." Rebecca caught my tone. But you don't believe it was an animal. I don't know what I believe anymore. It was the most honest thing I could say. She led me to the kitchen, where a half-packed suitcase lay open on the table. I called Jenny. She says we can stay with her as long as we need to. I've already started packing the kids' things. I stared at the suitcase, a strange mix of relief and disappointment washing over me. Relief that my family would be safe. Disappointment that Rebecca hadn't even waited to discuss it with me. When? I asked simply. Tomorrow morning. First light. She touched my arm gently. Come with us, Jack. Whatever this is, it's not worth your life. I can't, I said, the words coming automatically. Not yet. There are still things I need to understand. Rebecca's expression hardened. More important than your family's safety, than your own? It's not about importance, I tried to explain. It's about responsibility. If I just walk away, who's going to protect this town? Who's going to find out what's really happening? Let Miller handle it. It's his job. Miller's hiding something, I said, the words out before I could stop them. He knows more than he's saying. Rebecca stared at me, her anger giving way to concern. Jack, listen to yourself. You sound paranoid. Maybe I was. Maybe the stress and horror of what I'd seen had pushed me to the edge of reason. But deep down, I knew there was truth in my suspicions. Just go, I said finally. Take the kids to Jenny's. I'll join you as soon as I can. And when will that be? I had no answer for her. She nodded, as if my silence confirmed something she'd already suspected. We'll leave at 7, she said, turning away. If you change your mind, be ready. That night, I lay awake beside Rebecca, listening to the sounds of our home. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hall clock, the occasional creak of settling wood. Normal sounds, comforting in their familiarity. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant howl of what might have been a coyote, or something else entirely. My mind kept returning to what Chen had shared, to the pattern of killings stretching back decades. 7 souls, then silence, until the cycle began anew. But what triggered the cycle, and why Murphy? Was it random, or was there something specific about this place, these woods, that drew the creature back time and again? I must have drifted off eventually, because suddenly I was standing in the forest again, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to watch me with malevolent intent. The air was thick with fog, obscuring my vision beyond a few feet, and somewhere in that fog, something was moving. I could hear its breathing, wet and labored, circling me. Show yourself, I called out, my voice weak against the vastness of the forest. A low chuckle answered me, not animal, but distinctly human. The fog parted, and Sheriff Miller stepped into view, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like a predator's. You should have left it alone, Jack, he said, his voice distorted too deep. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. What are you hiding? I demanded. What do you know about the creature? Miller smiled, but his mouth stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were suddenly too sharp, too numerous. Why don't you ask it yourself? He stepped aside, and there it was, the thing from the forest. Its twisted form somehow more terrible in the clarity of my dream. But now I could see details I'd missed before. The patterns on its mottled skin weren't random, they formed symbols, ancient markings that seemed to writhe and shift as I looked at them. And its eyes, God, its eyes were human, filled with intelligence, with hunger, with something that might have been sorrow. It spoke, its voice like gravel being ground underfoot. You cannot stop the hunt. 7 to sleep, 7 to wake. The cycle continues. Why? I asked, frozen in place. Why are you doing this? The creature tilted its head, studying me as if the question surprised it. Why does the wolf hunt the deer? Why does the hawk take the mouse? It is nature. It is balance. Murder isn't balance, I spat. It's evil. Evil. The creature seemed to roll the word around, tasting it. A human concept. Meaningless. I am hunger. I am the forest's vengeance for sins long forgotten. It took a step toward me, those 2 long arms reaching out. You have seen me, marked me. The cycle is broken now. What does that mean? I backed away, but my feet seemed rooted to the ground. The creature's face split into what might have been a smile. It means the count begins again. 7 souls, and yours will be among them. I jolted awake, a scream dying in my throat. Beside me, Rebecca stirred but didn't wake. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m., the witching hour when the barrier between worlds was said to be thinnest. Superstitious nonsense, I told myself. Just a nightmare born of stress and horror and too many old newspaper clippings. But as I lay there, heart hammering against my ribs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That somewhere in the dark forest surrounding Murphy, A new hunt had begun, and I was now the prey. Dawn came too soon, gray light filtering through the curtains as Rebecca moved quietly around the bedroom, finishing her packing. I watched her through half-closed eyes, memorizing the familiar lines of her face, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. "I know you're awake," she said without looking at me. "Your breathing changes when you're pretending." I sat up, rubbing my face. "Sorry, just thinking about whether to come with us." There was hope in her voice, faint but present. I wanted to say yes. God, how I wanted to pack up, drive away from Murphy, and never look back. But the dream lingered, its warning echoing in my mind. If the creature truly had started a new cycle, if it was hunting again, running might not save us. "I need more time," I said finally. "There are things I need to understand." Rebecca's shoulders slumped, but she nodded. "I thought you'd say that." She zipped up her suitcase with finality. "The kids are already in the car. We'll call when we get to Jenny's." I got up, pulling her into an embrace that she only half returned. "I love you," I murmured into her hair. "All of you. This isn't about walking away from my family, isn't it?" She pulled back, her eyes searching mine. "Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what you're doing." "Becca." "No, Jack. I understand duty. I understand responsibility. What I don't understand is why you're choosing a town over your own flesh and blood." The words stung because there was truth in them. I was choosing to stay, to face whatever was happening in Murphy rather than flee with my family. But not because I valued the town more. "If I don't stop this," I said, gripping her shoulders gently, "it won't matter where we go. It will follow. It will hunt, and not just us, others too." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," she sighed, touching my face with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "Be careful, Jack, and come back to us. Promise me." "I promise." We both knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. After they left, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the little reminders of my family. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, Ben's toy cars scattered across the living room floor, Rebecca's cardigan draped over the back of a chair. Would I ever see them again? Or would I become another victim in the forest, another body torn apart by something beyond understanding? No, I wouldn't let that happen. I would find answers, and I would end this. For my family, for Murphy, for myself. I showered and dressed, strapping on my service weapon with more care than usual. Today was my day off, but I intended to use it productively. Dr. Chen had mentioned that the hiker I'd found, Dr. Marcus Reed, had been researching local legends. His notes might hold clues about what we were facing. The evidence would be at the station, locked in the case files. Getting access wouldn't be easy, not with Miller watching me. But I had to try. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt different, heavier, charged with an electric tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I scanned the tree line at the edge of our property, half expecting to see amber eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the usual rustle of leaves in the breeze, the morning calls of birds. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The town of Murphy felt different too as I drove through its quiet streets. News of Fredrickson's death had spread rapidly, compounded by rumors about the hikers found in the forest. The usual morning bustle was subdued, faces tense and wary. Several businesses had closed, their owners among those fleeing town. At Miller's Diner, no relation to the sheriff, a handwritten sign in the window read simply, "Closed until further notice." I pulled into the station parking lot, noting with relief that Miller's cruiser was absent. Maybe he was out at Fredrickson's place, or dealing with the mounting panic in town. Either way, his absence would make my task easier. Inside, the station was quieter than usual. Deputy Holt sat at the front desk looking up from his paperwork as I entered. "Bennett? Thought you were off today." "Just stopping by," I said casually. "Forgot some paperwork I need to finish." Holt nodded, returning to his work. "Sheriff's out at the morgue. Chen's doing the autopsy on Fredrickson." I feigned disinterest. "Right. I'll just grab my stuff and go." I moved past him toward the back of the station, where the evidence room was located. Officer Carol Jenkins was at her desk, typing up reports. She smiled as I approached. "Jack, didn't expect to see you today. How are Rebecca and the kids?" "They're good," I lied. "Staying with Rebecca's sister for a few days, just until things calm down here." Carol's smile faded. "Smart move. I sent my boys to stay with their dad in Asheville. This whole thing," she shuddered. "Never thought I'd be scared to live in Murphy." "It'll be over soon," I assured her, hoping I wasn't making a promise I couldn't keep. "Just need to find whatever animal is doing this." "You really think it's an animal?" Carol's voice dropped to a whisper. I heard you saw something out there. Something not normal. Word traveled fast in a small town. I glanced toward Holt, but he was engrossed in his paperwork, out of earshot. I saw something, I admitted. But I don't know what it was, that's why I'm here actually. Wanted to look over the evidence from the Reed case, the first hiker we found. Carol hesitated. You know Miller took you off that case, right? Officially, yes. But I'm the one who found the body. I just want to follow up on a few things, for my own peace of mind. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. Evidence room key is in my desk, third drawer. I'm going for coffee. Might be gone for 15 minutes or so. She stood, giving me a meaningful look. Don't make me regret this, Jack. You won't, I promised. As soon as she left, I retrieved the key and slipped into the evidence room. The Reed case files were easy to find, a large box labeled with the case number and date. I quickly located Reed's personal effects, a waterproof pouch containing his wallet, keys, phone, and the notebook I'd found clutched in his hand. The notebook was exactly as I remembered it, the leather cover stained with dried blood. I flipped through it quickly, scanning the entries I'd already seen about local legends and strange tracks in the forest. But there was more, pages I hadn't had time to read at the scene. Reed had been methodical in his research. He'd interviewed locals about forest legends, compiled historical accounts of disappearances and deaths, even mapped locations where sightings of the walker had been reported. One entry caught my eye. Local Cherokee elder, name withheld at request, shared fascinating insights about the creature. Says it's not a spiritual entity as commonly believed, but something more ancient. Before Cherokee, before any people, he said. It was here when the mountains were young. Claims the creature is tied to the land itself, can't leave the forest boundaries. Most intriguing, says there's a way to bind it, to force it back into dormancy before its cycle completes. Mentioned a cave system deep in the eastern ridge where the old magic still works. Following up tomorrow. Tomorrow had never come for Dr. Reed. But he'd left a crucial clue, a potential way to stop the creature. I flipped to the back of the notebook where Reed had drawn a crude map of the eastern part of the Nantahala forest. He'd marked several locations with X's, with one circled repeatedly, presumably the cave system mentioned by the Cherokee elder. I took photos of the relevant pages with my phone, then carefully replaced the notebook in the evidence box. As I was about to leave, something else caught my eye. A clear evidence bag containing what looked like a carved stone pendant. The label identified it as item #17 unknown artifact found on victim's person. The pendant was roughly oval-shaped, dark gray stone inscribed with symbols that looked vaguely similar to the ones I'd seen on the creature's skin in my dream. A chill ran down my spine as I examined it through the plastic. This was more than coincidence. I photographed the pendant too, then returned everything to its place and locked the evidence room. I'd just returned the key to Carol's desk when I heard the front door of the station open. Heavy footsteps approached. Footsteps I recognized. Bennett? Sheriff Miller's voice carried from the front desk. Holt says you're back here. I straightened, composing my features into what I hoped was a casual expression. Sheriff, just picking up some personal items. Miller appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took me in. In the back office, near the evidence room, Carol asked me to grab some forms while she was out. I lied smoothly. She's getting coffee. The sheriff didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, the radio on his belt crackled to life. Sheriff, this is Deputy Rivera. We've got another body. Hunter found it on the Eastern Trail, about 2 miles in. It's bad, sir. Miller grabbed his radio. Copy that. Secure the scene. I'm on my way. He pointed at me. You, in my office. Now. I followed him, my mind racing. Another body. The count was beginning again, just as the creature had warned in my dream. Miller closed the office door behind us, his expression grim. What were you really doing back there, Bennett? Looking for answers, I said, deciding that partial honesty was my best approach. I know you're hiding something about these killings, about what's in those woods. The sheriff's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. You need to let this go, Jack, for your own good, for your family's good. Is that a threat? A warning, Miller corrected. There are things at work here that you don't understand. Things beyond your experience, beyond your training. Then help me understand, I pressed. Because whatever's out there, it's not stopping. You heard Rivera, another body. That makes 9 now. 8? Miller said automatically, then caught himself. You're counting, I realized. You know about the pattern. 7 souls, then it sleeps. The color drained from Miller's face. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? It's true, isn't it? But the pattern's broken now. It's starting over. Miller sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking all of his 50-plus years. How much do you know? Not enough, I admitted. But I know there's a way to stop it. To bind it before it completes its cycle. The sheriff's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Who told you that? Reed's notes. He mentioned a cave system in the Eastern Ridge, where the old magic still works. Miller was silent for a long moment, studying me with new intensity. Finally, he sighed, reaching into his desk drawer to pull out a flask. He took a long swig, then offered it to me. This time, I declined. My grandfather was sheriff here, he said finally. Back in the 50s, during one of the cycles, he told me stories when I was a kid. I thought they were just that, stories. Ghost tales to scare me into behaving. He laughed humorlessly. Then I became sheriff, and I found his journals. The truth was worse than any ghost story. What is it? I asked. The creature? Miller shook his head. Nobody knows for sure. The Cherokee have one name for it. The early settlers had another. Some say it's a spirit, others a demon. My grandfather believed it was something older than either. Something that was here before people, before civilization. And the cycle? 7 victims, then it sleeps? That's the pattern, yes. 7 souls to sustain it through its dormancy. But if the cycle is interrupted, if it's seen or marked before completion, it starts again. My dream. The creature's words. You have seen me, marked me. The cycle is broken now. I saw it, I said quietly. The night I found Reed. I shot it. Miller nodded, unsurprised. I figured as much. That's why I tried to keep you away from the investigation. The fewer people who know, the better. But why keep it secret at all? Why not warn people? And say what? Miller's voice rose slightly. That there's an ancient monster in the woods that wakes up every 20 years to kill 7 people? That once it's done, it'll go back to sleep until the next cycle? Who would believe that? He shook his head. No. Better to let people think it's a bear or a mountain lion. Something they can understand. Something that won't make them think their sheriff has lost his mind. But people are dying, I argued. More will die if we don't stop it. You think we haven't tried? Miller's laugh was bitter. Every cycle someone tries, my grandfather, his father before him, the tribal elders, they all failed. Reed mentioned a way to bind it. A cave, the Whispering Cave. Miller nodded. It's real, deep in the Eastern Ridge, hard to find unless you know what you're looking for. The Cherokee used it for rituals centuries ago. Legend says it's a place where the veil between worlds is thin. My pulse quickened. Have you been there? Once. With my grandfather, when I was just a deputy, he thought he'd found a way to trap the creature there, to bind it permanently. Miller's eyes grew distant. It didn't work. The binding requires a sacrifice, a willing one. The implications hung heavy in the air between us. A sacrifice, a life freely given to end the cycle. Your grandfather? I asked quietly. Miller nodded, his expression grim. He tried. But at the last moment his courage failed. The creature escaped, completed its cycle, and went back to sleep. 20 years later it woke again, and here we are. I sat back, processing this information. It sounded insane, monsters and magic caves and blood sacrifices, yet after what I'd seen in the forest, I couldn't dismiss it. So what now? I asked. We just let it kill until it's satisfied? Then wait for it to wake up again in 20 years? Unless you've got a better idea. Miller's tone was resigned. The cave ritual has never worked. The sacrifice has to be pure, untainted by fear. And who wouldn't be afraid? Facing that thing, I thought of Rebecca and the kids, safely away from Murphy now, of the town slowly emptying as people fled, of the bodies in the forest, torn apart by something beyond understanding. Show me the cave, I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. If there's even a chance it could work. You're not listening, Miller cut in. It's suicide. And for what? A ritual that's failed for generations? That thing can't be stopped, Bennett. It can only be endured. Then why are you still here? I challenged. Why haven't you left town like everyone else? Miller's expression hardened. Because this is my home, my responsibility, same as my father and his father before him. Then you understand why I have to try. Our eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Miller sighed, reaching into his desk drawer again. But instead of the flask, he pulled out an old, folded map. Eastern Ridge, he said, spreading it on the desk. The cave entrance is here, hidden behind a waterfall. But Bennett, he looked up, his expression deadly serious. If you go there, you won't come back, and the creature will still complete its cycle. Your death will mean nothing. I studied the map, memorizing the location. Maybe, but I have to try. As I stood to leave, Miller's voice stopped me. Jack, the new body Rivera found? It's Dr. Chen. The news hit me like a physical blow. Chen with her careful analysis and historical research. Chen who had tried to help me understand what was happening. How? I managed, same as the others. But there was a message, carved into a tree nearby. Miller's eyes held mine. Your name, the creature's words echoed in my mind. 7 souls, and yours will be among them. It was hunting me now. And it wouldn't stop until it found me, or until I found a way to end it once and for all. I'm going to the cave, I said with finality. Today, now. Miller didn't try to stop me. Perhaps he knew it would be futile. Or perhaps, somewhere deep down, he hoped I might succeed where his grandfather had failed. Take this, he said, opening a cabinet behind his desk. He withdrew an old revolver, its metal gleaming dully in the office light. My grandfather's. The bullets are silver, blessed by a Cherokee elder. Probably superstitious nonsense, but, he shrugged. Can't hurt. I took the weapon, feeling its weight. The weight of history, of failed attempts and lost lives. Thank you. As I turned to leave, Miller called after me one last time. Bennett, if you somehow make it back, don't tell anyone what you know. Some secrets are better left buried. I nodded, understanding now why the sheriff had kept his silence all these years. The truth wasn't just frightening, it was unbelievable. And sometimes unbelievable truths were the most dangerous of all. Outside, the day had turned overcast, dark clouds gathering over the forest like an omen. I checked my phone one last time, a text from Rebecca confirming they'd arrived safely at her sister's house. I started to type a reply, then stopped. What could I possibly say? That I was heading into the forest to confront the creature that had haunted my dreams? That I might never see them again? In the end, I sent only, I love you all, more than anything. Then I pocketed the phone, got into my car, and drove toward the eastern ridge of the Nantahala forest where an ancient cave waited. And with it, perhaps, an end to the nightmare that had descended on Murphy, or perhaps just an end to me. The eastern ridge of the Nantahala forest loomed before me, a wall of green so dense it seemed impenetrable. I parked my car at the end of an old logging road, the farthest point accessible by vehicle. From here it would be on foot, a 3-mile hike through increasingly difficult terrain to reach the waterfall and the cave hidden behind it. I checked my gear one last time. Miller's silver-loaded revolver tucked into my belt alongside my service weapon, a flashlight, water, Reed's map photographs on my phone, and a small first aid kit. Not much to confront an ancient evil, but it would have to do. The trail started easily enough, a well-worn path winding between towering pines. But as I moved deeper into the forest, the path narrowed, eventually disappearing altogether. I navigated by the map and compass, pushing through dense undergrowth, climbing over fallen logs slick with moss. The forest felt different here, older somehow. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining above to create a canopy so thick that little sunlight penetrated. Even at midday it was dim, the air heavy with the scent of decomposing leaves and damp earth. I'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours when I first heard it, the distant sound of flowing water. The waterfall was close. I pushed forward with renewed determination, ignoring the scratches from thorny branches and the burning in my muscles. The sound grew louder, and suddenly the forest opened up. I stood at the edge of a small clearing, and there it was, a waterfall about 30 feet high cascading down a rock face into a clear pool below. The scene would have been beautiful if not for the purpose that had brought me here. According to Miller's map, the cave entrance was behind the waterfall, accessible by a narrow ledge that ran along the rock face. I circled the pool, searching for the path. There, almost hidden by ferns and moss, a faint trail leading to the base of the cliff. I followed it carefully, the ground growing slippery as I approached the waterfall. The roar of the water was deafening now, drowning out all other forest sounds. The ledge was narrower than I'd expected, barely wide enough for a person to inch along sideways. One slip would mean a fall into the churning pool below. Not fatal, perhaps, but potentially incapacitating. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my back against the wet rock and began to edge along the ledge, moving slowly, testing each foothold before committing my weight. The spray from the waterfall soaked me within seconds, making the already treacherous path even more dangerous. Halfway across, I froze, There, in the rock face beside me, were markings, symbols carved into the stone, similar to those I'd seen on the pendant, and in my dream, they seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, though I told myself it was just water reflecting the dim light. I forced myself to keep moving, and finally reached the space behind the waterfall. The curtain of water created a strange, isolated pocket, a liminal space between the outside world and whatever waited within the cave. The entrance itself was unremarkable. A dark opening about 7 feet high and 4 feet wide, worn smooth by centuries of water flow. Drawing my flashlight, I peered into the darkness beyond. The beam revealed a tunnel sloping gently downward, its walls glistening with moisture. More symbols were carved here, covering every available surface in a dense, intricate pattern. Some looked ancient, while others appeared newer, as if added by different hands over countless generations. I hesitated at the threshold, the weight of what I was about to do suddenly overwhelming. Was I really going to follow some half-understood ritual in an attempt to bind a creature I barely comprehended? Based on legends and the ramblings of a dead academic. But what choice did I have? Return to Murphy and wait for the creature to find me? Watch as it claimed more victims to satisfy its hunger? No, I had to try. For Rebecca and the kids, for Chen, for Murphy. I stepped into the cave, the temperature dropping noticeably as I moved away from the waterfall's entrance. The tunnel wound downward in a gentle spiral, the ceiling gradually lowering until I had to stoop to continue. The air grew colder, drier, carrying a mineral scent that tickled my nostrils. After what felt like an eternity of descent, the tunnel widened suddenly, opening into a vast chamber that my flashlight couldn't fully illuminate. The beam caught glimpses of stalactites hanging from the distant ceiling, pillars of stone rising from the floor, walls covered in more of the mysterious symbols. In the center of the chamber stood a circular stone dais, raised about 2 feet from the cave floor. It was perfectly flat, its surface carved with a complex spiral pattern that converged at a small depression in the center, a basin perhaps, or an altar. This was it, the place Miller had described, where his grandfather had attempted the binding ritual, where countless others had tried and failed before him. I approached the dais cautiously, sweeping my flashlight around the chamber. There was no sign of the creature, no indication that anything had disturbed this place in years. Yet the air felt charged, expectant, as if the cave itself was aware of my presence. Stepping onto the dais, I examined the spiral pattern more closely. The carvings were deep, precise, filled with a substance that looked like tarnished silver. At the center, the small depression was stained dark, with what I didn't want to contemplate. Now what? Miller had mentioned a ritual, a sacrifice, but had been vague on the details. Reed's notes had referred to old magic, but offered no specifics. I stood on the ancient stone, feeling foolish and afraid in equal measure. "I'm here," I called out, my voice echoing through the chamber. "Whatever you are, I'm here to end this." Only the drip of water answered me, a steady plink-plink from somewhere in the darkness. I tried again. "I know about the cycle, about the 7 souls. I'm offering myself to break it, to bind you." Still nothing. Just the cold silence of the cave and the distant rush of the waterfall. Frustration welled up in me. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was this all just superstition and legend after all? A movement caught my eye, something shifting in the darkness beyond the dais. I swung my flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through the blackness to reveal nothing. No, not nothing. As my eyes adjusted, I could see a faint mist forming at the edge of the chamber, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. It wasn't solid, more like a suggestion of form, shifting and swirling in the still air. "Who comes to the binding place?" The voice wasn't audible. It seemed to form directly in my mind, ancient and weary. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Officer Jack Bennett, from Murphy." "Why have you come, Jack Bennett from Murphy?" "To stop the creature. The one that hunts in our forest." The mist form drifted closer, circling the dais. "Many have tried. All have failed. The hunger cannot be stopped, only contained." "The binding ritual," I pressed. "I want to perform it. The price is high. A life freely given, without fear or regret. Few can offer such a sacrifice." I thought of Rebecca's face as she left with the kids, the hope in her eyes that I would follow. Of Ben and Lily, who might grow up without a father. Of the life I was willing to abandon. "I understand the price," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm willing to pay it." The mist form paused, hovering directly before me. "Are you? Look into your heart, Jack Bennett. Is it truly free of fear, of regret?" I wanted to say yes, to claim the courage needed for the ritual, but I knew it would be a lie. I was terrified of death, of failure, of never seeing my family again. And regret? How could I not regret leaving them behind? No, I admitted finally. I'm afraid. I regret what this will cost me, cost them. But I'm here anyway. The mist seemed to consider this. Honesty, rare in those who seek the binding. Will it work? I asked. If I'm afraid, if I regret, will the ritual fail? The ancient ones believe the sacrifice must be pure. But perhaps, the mist swirled thoughtfully. Perhaps courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Hope flickered in my chest. Tell me what to do. Blood must flow. Life must end. The spiral must be completed. Simple words for such a terrible act. I drew Miller's revolver, examining it in the dim light. Silver bullets, blessed by a Cherokee elder. A weapon meant for the creature, now to be turned against myself. If I do this, I said, if I complete the ritual, the creature will be bound, the killings will stop. For a time, the mist acknowledged. Until the binding weakens. Until another cycle begins. How long? A generation. Perhaps two. No binding is permanent, Jack Bennett. The hunger is as old as these mountains. It will outlast us all. Not the answer I'd hoped for, but better than nothing. 20, maybe 40 years of peace for Murphy. For my children to grow up safe. For their children to be born into a world temporarily free of the horror that had haunted these woods. I raised the revolver, pressing the barrel against my temple. The metal was cold against my skin, a stark reminder of the finality of what I was about to do. Wait. The mist form drifted closer. There is another way, a compromise. I lowered the gun slightly. What do you mean? The binding requires a life, but not necessarily an ending. You could become the vessel, the container. Your life energy would fuel the binding, keeping the hunger dormant. I don't understand. You would sleep, Jack Bennett, here in the cave. Not dead, but not truly alive. A guardian of the binding. And when the time comes, when the binding weakens, you would awaken. For how long would I sleep? Until the next cycle begins. 20 years, perhaps more. I tried to process this. Not death, but a kind of suspended animation. For decades, I would miss my children growing up, growing old, would awaken to a world changed, to a family that had moved on without me. Yet they would be alive. They would be safe. And when I awaken, what then? Then you would face the hunger again. Renew the binding, or release it to continue its cycle. A terrible responsibility. An endless vigil. But better than the alternative. Better than death, than allowing the creature to continue its slaughter unchecked. How do I become the vessel? The mist form gestured toward the center of the dais, the small depression I'd noticed earlier. Blood in the basin, life energy freely offered. The rest will follow. I holstered Miller's revolver and drew my pocket knife instead. The blade gleamed in the flashlight's beam as I pressed it against my palm. A sharp pain, a well of crimson, and then I was holding my bleeding hand over the depression, watching as my life essence dripped into the ancient stone. The effect was immediate and startling. The spiral pattern in the dais began to glow, lines of silver light racing outward from the center, illuminating the chamber in an eerie, pulsing radiance. The symbols on the walls responded, flaring to life one by one, until the entire cave was bathed in their eldritch light. The mist form expanded, encompassing me, seeping into my very being. I felt a coldness spreading through my veins, a heaviness in my limbs, my vision blurred, the world around me taking on a dreamlike quality. It begins, the voice whispered in my mind. The binding takes hold. A roar of rage echoed through the cave, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. The creature, the hunger, had sensed the binding, was fighting against it. It comes, the mist voice warned. It seeks to stop the ritual. You must complete the offering before it reaches you. I staggered, suddenly weak, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. More blood flowed from my palm, dripping steadily into the basin at the center of the spiral. Each drop sent another pulse of light racing through the patterns on the dais. The roaring grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the tunnel that led to the chamber. Fast, desperate movement. The creature knew what I was attempting, knew and feared it. More, the mist urged. The binding requires more. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I deepened the cut in my palm, watching as blood flowed more freely into the basin. The light from the spiral grew brighter, almost blinding now, forcing me to shield my eyes. And then it was there. The creature from the forest, the nightmare that had haunted Murphy for generations. It burst into the chamber like a force of nature, its twisted form even more terrifying in the silver light of the binding ritual. It saw me on the dais, understood what was happening, and let out a howl of such primal rage that it seemed to reach into my very soul. Those amber eyes locked with mine, filled with hatred and something else. Fear. It charged toward the dais, moving with that unnatural speed I'd witnessed in the forest. But as it reached the edge of the spiral, it recoiled as if struck, howling in pain. The binding was working, creating a barrier it couldn't cross, but it wasn't complete yet. I could feel it. The ritual needed more. Not just blood, but intention, commitment. I had to fully embrace my role as vessel, as guardian of the binding. I accept, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the creature's howls. I willingly become the vessel. I give my life energy to the binding. I will sleep to keep the hunger contained. The words seemed to resonate through the chamber, amplified by the ancient stone. The spiral pattern pulsed brighter, the barrier strengthening. The creature threw itself against it again and again, each attempt weaker than the last. My vision was tunneling now, darkness creeping in from the edges. I felt myself sinking to my knees on the dais, no longer able to stand. The coldness had spread throughout my body, a creeping numbness that should have been frightening but instead felt almost peaceful. The creature made one final desperate lunge toward me. Its clawed hands extended, jaws open in a silent scream, but the barrier held, flaring with silver fire at the point of impact. The creature was thrown back, its form suddenly less substantial, as if it was being unmade. "It is done," the mist voice whispered. "The binding is complete. Sleep now, Jack Bennett. Sleep and dream of those you protect." I tried to respond, but my lips wouldn't move. My body felt impossibly heavy, as if the stone of the dais was claiming me, becoming one with my flesh and bone. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the creature, the hunger, dissolving into mist, its amber eyes locked with mine in a final baleful stare. Then nothing. A void so complete it seemed to exist outside of time and space. I don't know how long I drifted in that darkness. It could have been minutes or millennia. There was no sense of passing time, no awareness beyond a vague feeling of existence. But gradually, sensations began to return. The cold hardness of stone beneath me, the distant sound of water dripping, the stale, mineral taste of cave air. My eyes opened slowly, reluctantly, as if the lids were weighted. The chamber was dark except for a faint, pulsing glow from the spiral pattern beneath me. My body felt strange, stiff, yet somehow insubstantial, as if I wasn't fully connected to it. How long had I slept? Had the binding held? Questions without answers swirled through my mind as I struggled to sit up, muscles protesting after their long dormancy. A soft voice echoed through the chamber, familiar yet strange. "He wakes." The guardian stirs. The mist form materialized before me, exactly as I remembered it. "Welcome back to consciousness, Jack Bennett. How long?" My voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. 23 years have passed since the binding was made. 23 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. Lily would be in her 30s now. Ben approaching 30. Rebecca, had she waited? Had she moved on? Of course she had. How could she not? "The binding?" I managed to ask. "Weakening. The hunger stirs. That is why you have awakened." I nodded, understanding. This was my purpose now, to maintain the binding, to keep the creature dormant. An endless cycle of sleep and vigilance. "I need to see them," I said, struggling to my feet. "My family. Before I renew the binding." The mist form hesitated. "The outside world has changed, Jack Bennett. Those you knew have moved forward with their lives. Seeing you as you are now, it may bring more pain than comfort." "I don't care," I said firmly. "I need to know they're safe, that it was worth it." The mist seemed to consider this, then drifted toward the tunnel leading out of the chamber. "Follow, but be warned, you are not as you were. The binding has changed you, as it changes all who serve as vessel." I took an unsteady step, then another, my body slowly remembering how to move. As I passed a reflective surface of pooled water, I caught a glimpse of my reflection and froze in shock. The face that stared back was still recognizably mine, but altered in subtle, unsettling ways. My skin was pale, almost translucent, with faint silver lines tracing patterns similar to those on the dais. My eyes, once brown, now held an unnatural amber glow. I had become something other than human. Not the creature, but no longer entirely myself either. The trip back through the tunnel seemed shorter than I remembered, or perhaps my perception of time had been altered by my long sleep. Soon I stood behind the waterfall again. The roar of falling water, a cacophony to ears that had known only silence for decades. The town lies that way, the mist said, indicating the direction. But remember, you are bound to the cave. You cannot stray far for long. The binding will pull you back. I nodded, understanding the limitations of my new existence. I wasn't free, would never be free again. But I had bought time for those I loved, for the town I had sworn to protect. I'll return, I promised. When I've seen them. The mist dissipated without response, leaving me alone on the narrow ledge behind the waterfall. I made my way carefully along it, my body moving with a strange new grace despite its stiffness. The forest beyond seemed both familiar and alien, the same trees, the same paths, but somehow altered. Or perhaps it was my perception that had changed. I could sense things now that had been invisible to me before, the pulse of life in every plant and creature, the ancient rhythms of the earth beneath my feet. I walked for hours, drawn unerringly toward Murphy by some internal compass. The town came into view as dusk was falling, streetlights flickering on one by one. It had changed, new buildings, new roads, a general sense of growth and prosperity that hadn't been there before. I kept to the shadows, instinctively aware that my appearance would cause alarm. Moving from one pool of darkness to another, I made my way to the street where our house had stood. Would it still be there? Would Rebecca still live in it? The house was there, but changed. A fresh coat of paint, a new roof, a garden where there had once been a simple lawn. A minivan sat in the driveway, unfamiliar to me. Through the windows I could see lights and movement. A family going about their evening routine, not my family. Strangers living in the home I had once shared with Rebecca and the kids. I shouldn't have been surprised, yet the reality of it cut deeper than I had expected. I stood in the shadow of a large oak across the street, watching the house for a long time. Eventually, curiosity drove me to approach, to peer through a gap in the curtains of the front window. A woman was setting the table for dinner, calling to someone in another room. Children's voices responded. Young, energetic. A normal family in a normal home. The life I had sacrificed. I was about to turn away when something caught my eye, a photograph on the wall. I couldn't make out the details from outside, but something about it held my attention. I moved to another window, seeking a better angle, and there it was, a family portrait, an older woman with Rebecca's smile, a man I didn't recognize, and two adults who had to be Lily and Ben, grown now, with families of their own. They had moved on, built lives without me, found happiness despite my absence. It was both heartbreaking and comforting. As I stood there absorbing this bittersweet knowledge, a figure emerged from the shadows further down the street. An old man, moving slowly but with purpose. There was something familiar about his gait, the set of his shoulders. He approached without hesitation, stopping a few feet away. "I thought you might come back," he said, his voice weathered but recognizable. "Sheriff Miller," I said, the name strange on my altered lips. He nodded, studying me with careful eyes. "Not sheriff anymore, retired 15 years ago." He gestured to my changed appearance. "The binding took then. You knew this would happen, that I would change?" I suspected. My grandfather's journals mentioned something similar happening to others who attempted the ritual. Not that any succeeded, until you. I looked back at the house, at the life continuing within. The town seems peaceful. It has been. No mysterious deaths, no disappearances. Not since you went into the cave. Miller's gaze was steady, assessing. "It worked, Jack. You saved them, but now it's weakening," I said. "The creature is waking." Miller's expression darkened. "Is that why you're back? It's starting again?" "Not yet, but soon if I don't return to renew the binding." He nodded slowly, processing this. "Do they need to know?" "Rebecca, the kids?" I considered the question, watching the family in the house, my family, yet not mine anymore. Would it bring them comfort, or just reopen old wounds? "Rebecca mourned you for years," Miller said gently. "Eventually she moved on, married a good man. John Hawkins runs the hardware store now. The kids are doing well. Lily's a doctor in Asheville, married with twins, then teaches at the high school, has a little boy of his own." Each word was a blow and a blessing. They had survived. Thrived even. Without me. "No," I said finally. "Let them keep their peace. Let them remember me as I was, not what I've become." Miller seemed relieved, though he hid it well. "What will you do now?" "Go back to the cave, renew the binding, sleep until I'm needed again." I spoke the words with a calm I didn't entirely feel. Is there anything I can do?" Miller asked, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. I thought for a moment. Keep them safe. Watch over them as you have been doing. And I hesitated. When the time comes again, when I wake next, make sure someone knows. Someone who can tell me about them. Miller nodded solemnly. I'll make arrangements. Pass the knowledge to someone I trust. We stood in silence for a while, two men out of time, bound by a secret few would believe. Finally, Miller extended his hand. Thank you, Jack, for what you did, what you're still doing. I took his hand, noting how he flinched slightly at the touch of my altered skin. Take care of them, Sheriff. I will. You have my word. With one last look at the house, at the life that had continued without me, I turned and walked back toward the forest. The pull of the cave was stronger now, an insistent tug at the core of my being. The binding was calling me back. As I reached the edge of town, I paused, looking back at the lights of Murphy glowing warmly against the night sky. A town saved, at least for a time. A price paid willingly, if not without regret. The forest has its secrets, and I'm damn sure I saw one of them that night. We never caught it. Hell, I'm not sure we ever will, but I've got a feeling it's still out there, lurking in those woods, waiting for its next victim. And you can bet I won't be the one to find it first. No, I didn't find it. It found me. And now we're bound together, guardian and prisoner, in an endless cycle of vigilance and dormancy. For how long, I cannot say. Perhaps one day someone will find a permanent solution, a way to end the hunger forever. Until then, I return to the Whispering Cave, to the dais where my blood first sealed the binding. I lie down on the cold stone, feeling the spiral pattern beneath me pulse with silver light. The mist surrounds me, welcomes me, as darkness once again claims my consciousness. And as I drift into that timeless void, I hold on to one thought, one comfort that makes the sacrifice bearable. They are safe. They are living. They are free from the horror that once haunted these woods. And for now, at least, the forest sleeps. I remember the first time I picked up a steering wheel like it was yesterday. There's something about spending most of your life behind one that burns certain moments into your memory. I've been driving trucks for close to 30 years now, hauling loads across every state in the continental U.S. You could say I know the highways of this country better than my own backyard. Every pothole, every scenic overlook, every decent truck stop with clean showers and fresh coffee. But there's one stretch of road in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest that I'll never forget. Not because of the landscape or the winding curves, but because of what happened there. Even now, years later, thinking about it makes my pulse quicken and my palms sweat. I can still see every detail when I close my eyes at night. It was late summer, 2018. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of produce, lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, headed for a grocery distributor in western Nebraska. The dispatcher had routed me through some back roads to save on tolls, which wasn't unusual. Companies are always looking to cut costs, and truck drivers usually bear the brunt of those decisions. The cab of my Peterbilt was like a second home, worn in all the right places. The seat cushion had my exact imprint, and I'd installed a small cooling fan that kept the air circulating just the way I liked it. My thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, half empty after 6 hours on the road. The radio played classic rock at a low volume, just enough to keep my mind from wandering too far. I'd left Kansas City before dawn, watching the sunrise in my mirrors as the city faded behind me. By midday, I was deep into the rural Midwest, where the land flattens out and cornfields stretch to the horizon. It's the kind of monotonous driving that can lull you into a trance if you're not careful. Mile after mile of identical landscape, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or grain silo. The GPS on my dashboard showed nothing but thin blue lines representing roads cutting through vast empty spaces. My phone had lost service about an hour back, but that didn't bother me. I'm used to the solitude. After 3 decades on the road, you learn to appreciate the quiet moments, the stretches of highway where it's just you and your thoughts. I'd been following a county road that barely deserved the designation. 2 lanes of patched asphalt, no shoulder to speak of, with cornfields pressing in so close on either side that it felt like driving through a tunnel of green. The stalks were tall that year, nearly ripe for harvest, and they swayed in the wind like a living thing. The truck's engine hummed steadily, a comforting sound that had become as natural to me as my own heartbeat. I had the windows cracked, letting in the smell of sun-baked earth and growing things. It was peaceful, normal. Just another day on the job, until I noticed the fuel gauge. It had dipped below quarter tank, which was unusual. I'd filled up before leaving Kansas City, and this rig typically got better mileage than that. I tapped the gauge, thinking it might be malfunctioning, but the needle didn't budge. Either I was burning fuel faster than normal, or there was a leak somewhere in the system. I'd learned long ago never to take chances with fuel on these back roads. Running out of gas in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and temperatures pushing 90 degrees wasn't a scenario I wanted to experience. According to my routing notes, there was supposed to be a small truck stop coming up in about 10 miles. Nothing fancy, just a place to fuel up and maybe grab a fresh coffee. The road stretched ahead, empty in both directions. No other vehicles had passed me in over an hour. Just endless cornfields on either side, the plants standing unnaturally still now, as if the wind had suddenly died. I remember thinking how quiet it had become. The radio had started to pick up more static than music, so I'd turned it off. The only sound was the rumble of tires on asphalt and the steady breath of the air conditioning. That's when I first noticed something odd. The quality of the light had changed. It was early afternoon, but the sun seemed to have dimmed somehow, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Heat waves rose from the asphalt ahead, distorting the horizon like a mirage. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The truck's thermometer read 97 degrees outside, but it felt hotter than that. The air coming through the vents felt thick, almost sticky against my skin. I adjusted the AC, cranking it higher, but it didn't seem to make much difference. Sweat beaded on my forehead and upper lip, and my shirt clung to my back. I kept checking the fuel gauge, watching the needle creep steadily downward. According to my odometer, I should have reached the truck stop by now, but there was nothing ahead but more cornfields and empty road. I was about to pull over and check my maps when I spotted it in the distance, a small cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat haze. As I got closer, I could make out a couple of fuel pumps and what looked like a small diner. The sign was too far away to read, but I felt a surge of relief. I'd make it after all. But as the distance closed, that relief began to curdle into something else. Something colder. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The truck stop had appeared out of nowhere, like it had materialized from the cornfields themselves. 1 minute there was nothing but empty road, and the next it was just there. A squat, weathered building with peeling paint and a gravel lot. 2 ancient gas pumps stood like sentinels in front of the structure. A neon sign flickered weakly in one window, spelling out the single word, EAT. I slowed the truck, gravel crunching under the tires as I pulled in. The place looked deserted, but the open sign was lit in the window. I figured it was just the slow time of day. Rural places like this probably didn't see much traffic except at breakfast and dinner hours. I parked near the pumps and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was jarring after hours of mechanical noise. I sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, taking in my surroundings. The truck stop looked like it had been built sometime in the 1960s and hadn't seen much maintenance since. The white paint had faded to a dirty gray, and dark streaks ran down from the roof where rainwater had left its mark over decades. One of the windows was cracked, repaired with duct tape that had yellowed with age. Something about the place felt wrong, not just run down or neglected, but wrong in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I needed fuel, and this was the only option for miles. I grabbed my wallet and climbed down from the cab. As my boots hit the gravel, the wind picked up suddenly, whipping dust and small debris across the lot. And with it came a smell, something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a mixture of odors. Something sweet like overripe fruit, mingled with the unmistakable scent of rot. The kind of smell that makes your stomach turn. I looked around for the source but saw nothing that could explain it. The smell faded as quickly as it had come, carried away by another gust of wind. I shook my head and headed for the diner. I needed to pay for the fuel, maybe grab a coffee, stretch my legs. Then I'd be on my way, putting this strange little place in my rearview mirror where it belonged. Little did I know I was walking into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The door to the diner creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the hinges protesting as if they hadn't been used in years. The sound echoed in the empty space, unnaturally loud. The first thing that hit me was the temperature. It was freezing inside, a stark contrast to the blistering heat outdoors. Cold enough that I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the dim interior. A single ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, its blades cutting through the stagnant air with a soft whooshing sound. The fan seemed to be moving too slowly to generate any real airflow, yet somehow it made the temperature even colder. Dust particles danced in the thin shafts of light that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. The diner's layout was simple, a row of booths along the windows, all empty, their vinyl seats cracked and patched with silver duct tape. A long counter ran the length of the back wall, with a row of bar stools positioned in front of it. Behind the counter, I could see an ancient coffee maker, a cash register that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a pass-through window that presumably led to the kitchen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and muffled in the cold air. "Anybody here?" No answer, just the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the distant hum of what might have been a refrigerator or freezer running somewhere in the back. I took a few steps further into the diner, my boots squeaking against the linoleum floor. The tiles were arranged in a checkered pattern of black and white, though years of dirt had turned the white squares a dingy gray. Some were cracked, revealing the concrete subfloor beneath. "Hello?" I tried again, louder this time. "I need to fuel up my truck." Still nothing. I approached the counter, looking for a bell or something to ring for service. The countertop was made of formica, once white but now yellowed with age and stained with countless coffee rings. It was cracked in several places, the edges sharp enough to cut skin. There was no bell, no sign asking customers to wait to be seated, just that stained countertop and a coffee pot that looked like it had been brewing the same batch for days. The liquid inside was thick and black, more like tar than coffee. A thin layer of mold had formed on the surface. As I was about to turn and leave, something caught my eye. There was a plate of food sitting on the counter, partially hidden behind the cash register. Half-eaten eggs, toast with a single bite taken out of it, and a slice of bacon with just the crispy end missing. The food looked fresh, like someone had just been eating it moments before I walked in. I reached out to touch the plate, then pulled my hand back. The food was stone cold, as if it had been sitting there for hours, but there were flies buzzing around it, landing on the congealed egg yolk, then taking off again. The insects moved sluggishly in the cold air, almost as if they were struggling against it. Something about that abandoned meal unsettled me deeply. It was like walking onto the scene of something that had been interrupted, violently interrupted. Why would someone leave in the middle of a meal? Where had they gone? And why was no one watching the store? The questions piled up in my mind, each one adding to my growing unease. I turned in a slow circle, taking in the rest of the diner. There were no personal touches, no photos on the walls, no local sports team memorabilia, none of the kitschy decorations you typically find in roadside diners. The walls were bare, except for a large clock above the entrance. It read 3:17, but its hands weren't moving. I checked my watch. It was just after noon. A door behind the counter presumably led to the kitchen. It was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I leaned over the counter, trying to see if anyone was back there. "Hello? Anybody in the kitchen?" My voice sounded odd, like it was being swallowed up by the silence rather than breaking it. As I leaned forward, my elbow bumped against something, a small leather-bound book that had been sitting on the counter. It fell open, revealing handwritten entries. A ledger of some kind. The most recent entry was dated today, which struck me as odd given the apparent abandonment of the place. I picked it up, scanning the page. It appeared to be a list of customers, times, and purchases. The handwriting was neat but old-fashioned, with elaborate loops and flourishes. The final entry read, 12:05 p.m., Nastrucker, coffee, eggs, toast, bacon, $6.50, didn't finish his meal. The entry sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the diner's temperature. I was the only trucker who had stopped here today. I was certain of that. The road had been empty for miles, and I hadn't ordered any food. I set the ledger down carefully, exactly where it had been. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, to get back in my truck and drive away as fast as possible. But I still needed fuel, and this was the only place for miles. I decided to skip the pleasantries and just pump the gas myself. I'd leave cash on the counter to cover it. I turned toward the exit, eager to be back in the familiar confines of my truck. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from the kitchen, like something heavy being dragged across a floor. Then silence. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "I just need some fuel. I can pay cash." No response, but I could feel eyes on me. That sensation of being watched was so strong it was almost physical, like pressure against my skin. I backed toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the kitchen entrance. My shoulder blades pressed against the cool glass of the diner's front door, and I fumbled for the handle without looking. When I finally pushed the door open and stepped outside, the heat hit me like a physical blow. The contrast between the diner's unnatural cold and the summer heat was jarring, making my head spin momentarily. I stood on the small concrete step, gulping down the hot air, trying to shake off the dread that had settled over me inside that place. I glanced back through the door's window. The interior of the diner looked darker now, the corners shrouded in shadows that hadn't been there before. The ceiling fan had stopped moving, and though I couldn't be certain from this distance, it looked like the plate of food was gone from the counter. I turned away, determined to fuel up quickly and get back on the road. The sooner I put this place behind me, the better. I walked toward my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The sun was directly overhead now, beating down mercilessly. Sweat began to form immediately on my brow, a welcome reminder of normality after the unnatural cold of the diner. But as I approached my truck, that sense of normality evaporated in an instant, because someone was standing by the rear of my trailer. He was tall, taller than me by at least 4 inches, which put him well over 6 feet. Broad-shouldered and lean, with the kind of wiry strength that comes from physical labor. He was dressed in what looked like an old mechanic's jumpsuit, once blue but now faded to a nondescript gray. The fabric was stained with what might have been oil or grease, patches of it darker in some places, as if it had been worn for years without washing. His back was to me as he stood by my trailer, one hand resting on the metal surface. In his other hand he held a large wrench, which he was tapping rhythmically against the trailer's rear door. The sound echoed in the quiet lot, a steady metallic ping that sent ripples of unease through me with each impact. I stopped about 20 feet away from him, my body tensing instinctively. There was something profoundly wrong about the way he stood there, something predatory in his posture that triggered ancient warning systems in my brain. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and authoritative. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. Just kept tapping that wrench against my trailer in that same steady rhythm, tap, tap, tap. His head was slightly tilted, as if he was listening for something inside the trailer. "Hey buddy." I tried again, louder this time. "That's my rig. You need something?" Still nothing. The tapping continued, unchanged. Tap, tap, tap. I took a step closer, forcing myself forward despite every instinct telling me to retreat. I'm not a small man. Decades of loading and unloading cargo had kept me sturdy even as I approached my 50s, but there was something about this stranger that made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. "Look, man, I don't know what you're doing, but I'd appreciate it if you'd step away from my trailer." The tapping stopped abruptly. The sudden silence felt more threatening than the noise had been. Slowly, with a deliberate stiffness that reminded me of a rusty hinge, the man turned around to face me. His movements weren't natural. They were too precise, too mechanical, like someone mimicking human behavior rather than actually being human. His face was ordinary in a way that was itself unsettling. Neither handsome nor ugly, neither young nor old. It was the kind of face you'd forget immediately after seeing it. Nondescript features arranged in a blank expression, except for his eyes. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was no emotion in them, no curiosity or anger or confusion, just a cold, calculating assessment, like I was an object rather than a person. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I was about to speak again when his expression changed. His lips curled upward in what I suppose was meant to be a smile, but there was something deeply wrong about it. It was too wide, revealing too many teeth, and it never reached those empty eyes. It was the kind of smile a predator might give its prey right before the kill. I took an involuntary step backward, my boot crunching on the gravel. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," I said, raising my hand slightly in a placating gesture. "I'm just trying to fuel up and be on my way." His smile widened even further, stretching his face in a way that should have been physically impossible. Without warning, he dropped the wrench, letting it clang loudly against the asphalt. The sound made me flinch. Then, with that same mechanical precision, he turned and walked away, heading around the side of the diner. His gait was wrong somehow. Too even, too measured, like each step was exactly the same length as the one before it. I didn't wait to see where he was going. The moment he disappeared from view, I ran for my truck, my heart hammering against my ribs. I covered the distance in seconds, yanked open the door, and hauled myself into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the keys, dropping them onto the floor mat. Cursing, I bent down to retrieve them, then jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound of normality in the midst of whatever the hell was happening. I locked the doors, then checked all the mirrors, scanning for any sign of the stranger. Nothing, just the empty lot, the dilapidated diner, and the endless cornfields beyond. I was about to shift into gear when I heard it, a dull thud from the back of the trailer, like something heavy had impacted against the metal. I froze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The truck was still idling, the familiar vibration of the engine traveling up through the seat and into my body. But I couldn't move, couldn't bring myself to check the mirrors again. The thud came again, louder this time, then a scraping sound, like something being dragged along the length of the trailer. My breath caught in my throat. With an effort that felt physical, I forced myself to look at the side mirror. Nothing there. I checked the other mirror. Still nothing, just empty space where the stranger should have been. I exhaled shakily, telling myself I was overreacting. The sounds were probably just the trailer settling, or maybe something had shifted in the cargo. It happened all the time with refrigerated loads. The cooling system caused the metal to contract and expand, sometimes creating odd noises. But as I reached for the gear shift, I glanced at the rearview mirror and the blood in my veins turned to ice water. The stranger was standing directly behind my trailer, much closer than before. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him in either side mirror. It was as if he'd materialized out of thin air. But that wasn't what sent a spike of terror through my chest. It was what he was holding, a long piece of metal that tapered to a point. It caught the sunlight as he raised it, flashing like a signal. His face had changed too. Gone was the unsettling smile, replaced by an expression of pure malice. His features had somehow sharpened, becoming more defined, more predatory. His eyes were fixed on me through the mirror, and I knew with absolute certainty that he could see me watching him. I didn't think, I just acted. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The big rig lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, not caring about the strain on the engine, focused only on putting distance between myself and whatever the hell was back there. The truck shot out onto the empty county road, the trailer swinging wildly before straightening out behind me. I pushed the speed up to 70, then 80, the engine screaming in protest. The legal speed limit for a commercial vehicle was irrelevant now. All that mattered was escape. I checked the mirrors again, half expecting to see the stranger running after the truck with that inhuman speed and precision, but the road behind me was empty. Just dust settling back onto the asphalt in the wake of my hasty departure. I drove like that for miles, my heart hammering, sweat soaking through my shirt. The adrenaline kept me alert, scanning the road ahead and the mirrors constantly. Every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision made me flinch. The cornfields gave way to open farmland, then to small clusters of houses as I approached a town. Civilization had never looked so good. I slowed down as I entered the town limits, not wanting to attract attention from local law enforcement. The last thing I needed was to be pulled over and forced to stop. I found a busy gas station on the main street and pulled in, parking where I could see the truck from all angles. Only then did I allow myself to relax slightly, unclenching my hands from the steering wheel and taking a deep, shuddering breath. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. Who was that man? What had he wanted? And what the hell was going on at that diner? I needed to check the trailer. Whatever I'd heard back there, the thud, the scraping, I needed to make sure my cargo was secure. And, though I hated to admit it even to myself, I needed to make sure nothing, or no one, had hitched a ride. With reluctance born of genuine fear, I climbed down from the cab and walked to the back of the trailer. The padlock on the rear doors was still secured exactly as I'd left it when I loaded up in Kansas City. I examined the exterior of the trailer carefully. No dents, no scratches, no signs that anyone had tampered with it. I unlocked the doors and swung them open, half expecting to find the stranger crouched inside among the pallets of produce. But there was nothing out of place, just neat rows of wrapped pallets, exactly as they should be. I closed and locked the doors again, then leaned against them, my legs suddenly weak. Whatever had happened back there, whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen, it hadn't followed me here, or had it. As I turned to head back to the cab, something caught my eye, a small piece of fabric, caught on one of the trailer's rear lights. I pulled it free and examined it. It was a scrap of faded blue cloth, frayed at the edges, the same color as the jumpsuit the stranger had been wearing. I dropped it like it had burned me, watching as it fluttered to the ground. Then I crushed it under my boot, grinding it into the pavement until nothing remained but threads. I needed to report this. Whatever had happened at that diner, it wasn't normal, wasn't safe. What if some other trucker stopped there, unaware of the danger? I walked back to the cab on unsteady legs, climbed in and locked the doors behind me. Then I pulled out my phone and looked up the number for the county sheriff's office. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Department was housed in a squat brick building on the outskirts of town. It looked exactly like what you'd expect in rural Nebraska. Functional, no nonsense, with an American flag hanging limply from a pole out front in the still afternoon air. I'd called ahead and the dispatcher had asked me to come in person to file a report. Strange occurrence at an abandoned diner, she'd classified it as. Something in her tone made me think she didn't consider it a high priority. I parked my rig in the spacious lot next to the building, making sure to lock it before heading inside. The reception area was empty except for a middle-aged woman behind a desk, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked up as I entered, her expression neutral. "Help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "I called earlier about an incident at a diner off County Road 17, I explained. Dispatcher said I should come file a report." She nodded, picked up a phone, and spoke briefly into it. A few moments later, a door opened, and a man in a tan uniform stepped out. He was tall and lean, with the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. The name badge on his chest read Sheriff Dawson. "You the trucker?" he asked, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "Come on back to my office." I followed him through the door and down a short hallway to a small office. It was spartanly furnished, a metal desk with a computer, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets along one wall. The only personal touch was a fishing trophy mounted on the wall behind the desk. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Coffee?" I declined, and he settled into the chair behind the desk, pulling a notepad toward him. "So dispatch says you had some kind of incident at a diner on County Road 17. That right?" I nodded and began to recount what had happened. As I spoke, the sheriff's expression remained impassive, giving away nothing. He took notes occasionally but didn't interrupt. I told him everything: the abandoned diner, the cold inside despite the heat outside, the plate of food, the ledger entry, and finally, the stranger by my truck. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying me. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "It's what happened," I replied, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. He held up a hand. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, just that it's unusual." He flipped through his notes. "This diner, can you give me the exact location?" I described it as best I could. "Approximately 15 miles east of town on County Road 17, a small building with 2 gas pumps out front and a neon EAT sign in the window." The sheriff frowned. "That's the thing," he said slowly. "There hasn't been a diner at that location for years. Place closed down back in the 90s when the owner died. Building's been abandoned since then." I stared at him. "That's not possible. I was just there a few hours ago." "The structure's still standing," he acknowledged, "but it hasn't been operational in decades. No electricity, no running water. Place is just a shell." "But the lights were on," I insisted. "The open sign was lit. There was food on the counter." Sheriff Dawson's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not calling you a liar. Heat can do funny things to a person's perception. You said yourself you'd been driving for hours without a break. Maybe you saw what you expected to see. A working diner, instead of what was actually there." "And the man?" I asked. "The one by my trailer? Was he a hallucination too?" The sheriff shrugged. "Could have been a vagrant. We get a few passing through, following the railroad lines. Some of them aren't right in the head, if you know what I mean. Might have been checking your trailer for something to steal." I shook my head. This wasn't some homeless guy. There was something wrong about him. The way he moved, the way he looked at me. Sheriff Dawson sighed and closed his notebook. "Here's what I can do. I'll send a deputy out there to check the place, make sure no one's squatting in the building. And I'll put out an alert for any suspicious individuals matching your description, but without more to go on. A license plate, a name, something concrete. There's not much else I can do." I nodded, knowing he was right but still feeling unsatisfied. "Has anyone else ever reported anything similar? Other truckers, maybe?" A flicker of something, hesitation perhaps, crossed the sheriff's face. "We get reports now and then, people passing through see things that aren't there. Common phenomenon on lonely stretches of road." He was holding something back. I was sure of it. But I also knew I wasn't going to get anything more out of him. I stood up, extending my hand. "Thanks for your time, Sheriff." He shook my hand, then walked me back to the reception area. As I was about to leave, he called after me. "One more thing." I turned back. "I'd avoid that stretch of road in the future if I were you," he said, his voice casual but his eyes serious. "Lots of better routes to take, even if they add a few miles to your trip." With that cryptic advice, he nodded once and disappeared back through the door. Outside, the afternoon had begun to fade into evening. The air was still hot, but some of the intensity had gone out of it. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, trying to make sense of what the sheriff had told me. The diner hadn't been operational for decades? That couldn't be right. I'd seen it with my own eyes. The lights, the plate of food, the ledger, unless I hadn't. Unless the heat and fatigue had caused me to hallucinate the whole thing. But then what about the stranger? What about the sounds I'd heard at the back of my trailer? And what about the scrap of fabric I'd found? I climbed back into my truck, locked the doors, and sat there in the gathering twilight. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize what had happened. I'd been driving too long without a break. The heat had affected my perception. I'd seen an abandoned building and my mind had filled in the blanks, turning it into a functioning diner. But another part of my brain, a deeper, more primitive part, knew better. What I'd experienced wasn't a hallucination. It was real even if it defied explanation. I started the engine and pulled out of the sheriff's parking lot. I still had a delivery to make, and I was already behind schedule because of this detour. The grocery distributor was expecting their produce first thing in the morning. As I drove through the small town, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the stranger standing in the middle of the road behind me. But there was nothing out of the ordinary, just normal evening traffic and pedestrians going about their business. I found a motel on the outskirts of town and checked in for the night. The room was basic but clean. A double bed, a small desk, a TV mounted on the wall, and a bathroom with a shower that ran lukewarm at best. I brought in my overnight bag and my cooler of food, double-checked that the truck was locked, and then secured the motel room door behind me. I should have been exhausted. I'd been on the road since dawn, and the encounter at the diner had drained what little energy I had left. But as I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stranger's face, that too wide smile, those empty eyes. I heard the metallic tapping of the wrench against my trailer. I felt the unnatural cold of the diner seeping into my bones. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. when I finally gave up on sleep. I got up, turned on all the lights in the room, and sat at the small desk with my logbook and a pen. If I couldn't sleep, I might as well get some paperwork done. But instead of filling out my hours of service, I found myself drawing. I'm no artist, but I sketched the stranger's face as best I could remember it. The blank features, the empty eyes, the unnatural smile. Looking at the completed drawing sent a shiver through me. It didn't capture the wrongness of him, the sense that he wasn't quite human, but it was close enough that I tore the page out of my logbook and crumpled it up. I was about to throw it in the trash when I hesitated. Instead, I flattened it out again and folded it carefully, tucking it into my wallet. Why, I couldn't have said. It just felt important somehow, like evidence of what I'd experienced. The night dragged on, each hour marked by the red digits of the clock. At some point, I must have dozed off in the chair because I jerked awake to the sound of knocking. For a disoriented moment, I thought I was back at the diner, the stranger tapping his wrench against my trailer, but it was just housekeeping, checking to see if I wanted my room serviced. I glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. I'd slept, if you could call it that, for less than 3 hours. I declined housekeeping, took a quick shower, and dressed. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked haggard. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, stubble covering my jaw, lines of fatigue etched into my face. I splashed cold water on my skin, trying to wake up fully. By 8 a.m. I was back on the road, headed for the grocery distributor. I took a different route than planned, adding about 20 miles to my trip but avoiding County Road 17 entirely. The extra time and fuel cost were worth it to not have to pass by that diner again. The delivery went smoothly, the warehouse crew unloaded the produce efficiently, and the paperwork was processed without any issues. By noon, I was empty and ready for my next assignment. I called my dispatcher to report the successful delivery and waited for my next routing instructions. As I sat in the truck, watching the warehouse activity through my windshield, I debated whether to mention the incident at the diner. In the harsh light of day, it seemed less real somehow. More like a bad dream than something that had actually happened. In the end, I said nothing about it. What would I even say? That I'd been menaced by a stranger at a diner that apparently hadn't been operational for decades? That I'd felt a presence following me, watching me? They'd think I was losing my mind, and in this business that's a fast track to unemployment. So I accepted my next assignment, a load of electronics heading east to Ohio, and pulled out of the warehouse lot, leaving Nebraska and its cornfields behind me. As the miles accumulated, the incident at the diner began to recede in my mind, not forgotten but at least pushed back to where it wasn't constantly at the forefront of my thoughts. But that night, in another anonymous motel room in another anonymous town, the nightmares began. The dreams always start the same way. I'm driving my truck down a deserted stretch of highway, cornfields on either side extending to the horizon. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the road. I'm alone, or at least I think I am, until I check my rearview mirror. He's there, sitting in the passenger seat that should be empty. Just sitting, staring straight ahead, that unnatural smile fixed on his face. I try to pull over, to stop the truck, to escape, but my hands won't move from the steering wheel. My foot is locked on the accelerator. "Where are we going?" I ask, my voice tight with fear. He turns his head to look at me. The movement too smooth, too precise. His smile widens impossibly and he says only one word, "Home." Then I wake up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the echo of that single word fading in my ears. It's been 3 years since the incident at the diner and the nightmares still come at least once a week. They're more frequent when I'm on the road, less so when I'm home with my family. But they never stop completely. I've learned to live with them just as I've learned to live with the constant vigilance that has become second nature to me. I check my mirrors more frequently than necessary. I never park in isolated areas. I avoid small, independent truck stops in favor of the big chains with their bright lights and constant activity. And I never ever drive through Nebraska if I can help it. I've researched that stretch of County Road 17 extensively in the years since my encounter. The sheriff was right. The diner had indeed closed in the early 1990s when the owner, a man named Gerald Whitman, passed away. The building had stood abandoned since then, occasionally vandalized by local teenagers but otherwise ignored. What the sheriff hadn't told me, what I discovered through persistent digging in local newspaper archives, was that there had been a series of disappearances along that stretch of road over the decades. Not many, just one every few years. Always travelers, always people passing through who wouldn't be immediately missed. A hitchhiker in 1995, a salesman in 2001, a college student driving home for the holidays in 2008. The most recent had been another truck driver just 6 months before my own experience. His abandoned rig was found on County Road 17, the engine still running, the driver's door open. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just an empty truck and a missing driver. The authorities had classified it as a voluntary disappearance. The driver had been having financial problems, they said. He'd probably staged his disappearance to start a new life somewhere else. It happens sometimes in this line of work. The endless roads, the solitude. It could make a person want to reinvent themselves, leave everything behind. But I knew better. I'd seen what waited on that lonely stretch of road. I never reported my findings to the authorities. What would be the point? They'd already dismissed my initial report as the hallucinations of a tired driver. Why would they believe my theory about a series of seemingly unconnected disappearances spanning decades? Instead, I started telling my story to other truckers. Not the full version, not the part about the diner being abandoned for years or the stranger's inhuman qualities. Just a cautionary tale about a creepy encounter at a rundown truck stop in Nebraska. A warning to avoid County Road 17 if possible. To stay on the main highways with their traffic and their regular patrols. Some laughed it off. Others shared their own stories of strange encounters on lonely stretches of road. Lights that followed them for miles before disappearing. Voices on the CB radio when no other trucks were in range. Figures standing in the middle of the highway that vanished when approached. The road can play tricks on your mind, they all agreed. The isolation, the monotony, the exhaustion. It's a perfect recipe for the imagination to run wild. But a few listened with serious expressions, nodding as if they knew exactly what I was talking about. One old-timer, a veteran driver with over 40 years behind the wheel, pulled me aside after I shared my story in a truck stop outside of Indianapolis. "I know that diner," he said, his voice low. "Stopped there once, back in the 80s. Place gave me the creeps, even then. There was a man there too, watching me from across the lot. Never said a word, just stared. I didn't stick around long enough to find out what he wanted." He gripped my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "You were lucky," he whispered. "Others weren't." Then he walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I've since developed rituals to keep the nightmares at bay. I keep my truck meticulously maintained, as if mechanical perfection can somehow ward off the supernatural. I never drive past sunset if I can help it. I keep a small flashlight in my pocket at all times, even when I'm sleeping, because in my dreams the darkness is where he hides. My wife notices these peculiarities but doesn't comment on them. She knows something happened on that Nebraska run 3 years ago, something that changed me. I've never told her the full story. How could I? It sounds insane even to my own ears, and I lived through it. Instead, I told her a sanitized version, a threatening encounter with a strange man at a remote truck stop. Enough to explain my newfound caution, my occasional night terrors, my reluctance to take certain routes. She accepted it without pressing for details, one of the many reasons I love her. But sometimes, when I wake up gasping from another nightmare, she holds me in the darkness and whispers, "You're safe now. He can't find you here." And I wonder how much she's guessed, how much she's pieced together from my fragmented sleep talk and the notes I've accumulated over the years. Last month, I was assigned a route that would have taken me through Nebraska again. Not on County Road 17, but close enough to make my palms sweat and my heart race when I saw the routing. For the first time in my career, I refused a job. I cited mechanical issues with my truck, a flimsy excuse that my dispatcher saw right through. But he didn't push it, just assigned me a different route heading south instead. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened at that diner. Was it a hallucination, as the sheriff suggested? A waking nightmare brought on by fatigue and isolation? Or was it something more, something that defies rational explanation? All I know is that whenever I pass a rundown diner on a lonely stretch of road, I press a little harder on the accelerator. Whenever I see a man in a mechanic's jumpsuit, I change direction. And whenever I check my mirrors and see nothing behind me, I feel not relief but dread. Because sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what you can see but what you know is there even when you can't. The highways of America stretch endlessly before me, a network of possibilities and destinations. I still love the open road, still find peace in the rhythm of the miles passing beneath my wheels, but now I know that not all roads lead to places marked on any map. Some lead to darker destinations, places where the normal rules don't apply. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that somewhere out there, on a forgotten stretch of County Road 17, a neon sign still flickers in a diner window, spelling out a single word, EAT. He's waiting there. That not quite man with his too wide smile and empty eyes, waiting for the next traveler to stop, to step inside, to become another disappearance that no one can quite explain. I was lucky. I got away. Others weren't so fortunate. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night when sleep won't come, I wonder if I truly escaped at all, or if I'm just being allowed to think I did, because the dreams keep coming. And in each one, he's a little closer to finding me again. I took the job at Glacier because I needed to disappear, not in a dramatic sense, not because I'd done something criminal or shameful. I came to this remote corner of Montana because my wife had died in a car accident on Interstate 90 near Missoula, and after 6 months of being a person who existed in Denver, going through the motions of search and rescue coordination, attending department meetings, and facing 100 concerned colleagues, I realized that conventional life was suffocating me. The well-meaning questions, the sympathetic glances, the funeral platitudes that had become as worn and thin as old rope. I'd been a ranger before I moved into administration. 12 years of field work in the Colorado Rockies, managing trails, conducting rescues, understanding the delicate ecology of high-altitude environments. That was who I was when my wife was alive. That version of me had a name people used, a routine, a future that made sense. After she was gone, I couldn't go back to being that person in that place. So when the position opened at Glacier, a senior ranger post managing the remote northern sector, I applied. The interview was formal but perfunctory. They needed someone experienced and able-bodied who could work alone. I was all of those things. The isolation wasn't a concern for them. It was a requirement. The ranger station and cabin were positioned at the north edge of the park, overlooking Kintla Lake, miles from the nearest populated area. In winter, it was nearly unreachable. In summer, maybe 3 hiking groups per month would pass through the jurisdiction. That sounded like mercy to me. I arrived in late May when the snow was finally receding from the lower elevations and the lake was still gray cold with snowmelt. The cabin had been empty for 3 months. It was basic but well-maintained. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a propane stove, a wood-burning fireplace for backup heat, and a radio unit that connected to park headquarters in West Glacier, about 40 miles south. My truck was a 2016 Ford outfitted with emergency supplies. My job was to monitor the area, maintain trails, respond to emergencies, and document wildlife activity. The first month was quiet in the way I needed. I repaired sections of the Gunsight Lake Trail. I cleared deadfall and rebuilt cairns. I documented a family of mountain goats. I filed reports. I existed in a space where no one required me to be anyone other than what I could demonstrate through actions. The silence at night was profound but not lonely. It felt more like a kind of permission. It was in the 3rd week of June when I found the first anomaly. I was conducting a routine patrol along the eastern section of Kintla Lake. checking for erosion and trail damage. The June weather had been warm and clear, unusual for this early in the season. The snow line was receding daily, exposing portions of the terrain that normally wouldn't be visible until July. That's when I noticed the prints, not human, not animal in any pattern I could identify with certainty. They were pressed into a soft patch of earth where the snow had only recently melted. The prints were roughly canine in appearance, perhaps wolf or large dog. But there was something wrong with the spacing and the depth. The impressions were too deliberate, almost as if something had stepped once per location with significant force. I measured them with my hand, larger than any wolf track I'd ever documented in Colorado. The claw marks, if they were claw marks, were inconsistent, suggesting an animal that didn't walk on all fours in any conventional way. I photographed them and recorded GPS coordinates. Wildlife management would want documentation if there was an unusual predator in the area, but something about the prints made my neck tighten. I'd spent enough time in wilderness to trust that instinct. I marked the location and continued my patrol, moving faster than before. That night I radioed in to the station chief, a woman named Morrison who managed the whole park from West Glacier. Possible unusual canine activity, I reported. Found tracks near the eastern shore, sizes larger than expected wolf range. I'll continue monitoring. Probably just an old print, Morrison said. Her voice came through with the slight digital degradation of radio communication. Bear tracks sometimes get misidentified. Could be from last year, just exposed by snowmelt. The ground was soft, I said. These are recent, within days. Understood. Continue monitoring. Let me know if you encounter anything else. A pause. You doing okay out there, Addison? Not too isolated? It was a professional courtesy check-in, but it struck something raw. I'm fine, I said. Quiet is what I needed. Good. Stay safe. I kept that feeling of wrongness to myself. The prints appeared again 4 days later, this time on the northern bank of Kintla Lake, about a mile from my cabin. These were fresher, maybe only hours old. The same characteristics, too large. The gait pattern suggesting something that didn't quite move like any animal in any taxonomy I knew. I documented everything again and added a note about the new location. It occurred to me then that the cabin, while remote by most standards, was still positioned along established trails. The wildlife I was monitoring was typically transient, but whatever had made these prints seemed to be following a pattern, a route. The western shore of Kintla Lake, then north, then back around, a circuit that brought the creature within a few miles of my position. I started leaving my radio on at night, instead of just turning it on in the morning. I checked the ammunition in my service pistol and made sure my rifle was cleaned and ready. These were reflex actions, practical measures. I didn't let myself think about why I needed them yet. The first time I heard it, I dismissed it as a dream. It was sometime between midnight and the first gray hints of dawn, a sound that pulled me from sleep with such force that my heart was already hammering before my eyes opened. A vocalizing. That's the only word I have for it. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. Something that seemed to combine elements of both and include harmonics that no single throat should be able to produce. It came from somewhere across the lake, from the dark forest on the western shore. I lay in bed, fully awake, listening as the sound moved. It wasn't continuous. It would begin, hold for a few seconds, then cease, then nothing for 30 or 40 seconds. Then it would begin again, always from a slightly different location along the distant shore. I got out of bed and went to the window, rifle in hand, without consciously deciding to retrieve it. The night was clear enough to see the outline of the tree line against the marginally lighter sky. The moon was maybe half full, enough to cast minimal shadows. I couldn't see movement, but I could still hear the sound. It was getting closer to my position. I turned on the cabin's external lights, the floodlights that illuminated the clearing immediately around the structure. The sudden brightness was shocking after the darkness. I saw nothing immediately. The lake water was calm and dark. The immediate perimeter looked undisturbed, but the sound continued, still distant, still moving. I went to the radio and keyed it. Station base, this is Ranger Post. Wildlife distress call. Possible predator vocalization. Approximately 1 mile out, western sector. Monitoring. Morrison's voice came back slower than usual, suggesting she'd been sleeping. Copy that. What's your assessment? Unknown, I said, not matching any documentation I have. Probably an elk or moose, something distressed. They make strange sounds. Stay in the cabin. I'm checking the incident log. Nothing reported for your area recently. Copy, but it wasn't an elk. I knew the sounds elk made. I'd heard every variation of stress vocalizing that ungulates were capable of producing. This was different in a fundamental way. It had intentionality. It had something like language, except language was a human concept, and this was clearly not human. The sound continued for perhaps another hour, slowly moving south along the lakeshore. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was somehow worse than the noise had been. I checked the cabin's locks 3 times. I didn't return to bed. The next morning, I found the tracks. They were on my deck. On the actual wooden deck that extended from the cabin's eastern entrance, maybe 15 feet from where I'd stood at the window. The same massive prints with those wrong claw impressions. Whatever had made them had approached the cabin at some point during the night while I was inside. While I was at the window, perhaps, thinking I was looking in the right direction. The tracks led from the edge of the clearing up to the deck, then around to the western side of the cabin. The pattern suggested the creature had walked around the entire structure methodically, as if examining it. The pace indicated no urgency, just a slow, deliberate circuit, like something evaluating a problem. I photographed everything. I marked the tracks with flagging tape. Then I called Morrison again. "The prints came to the cabin," I reported. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "It circled the structure last night." This time Morrison didn't immediately respond. When she did, her voice had shifted to something more official, more concerned. "Did you see it?" "No." "Heard it vocalizing. Sounded like it was moving along the western shore, then south. Didn't see the animal. We're going to want samples. Blood if possible, scat, anything that can be DNA tested. This is outside normal park parameters." A pause. "You want backup? I could get someone up there within 4 hours." Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me that was still the person who lived in conventional society, who understood the comfort of other humans, who hadn't fully committed to isolation. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since I'd arrived, pushed back against that impulse. "Not yet," I said. "Let me document more. Could be a migrating predator. I don't want to create alarm over a transient. Give me a few days." Morrison didn't sound convinced, but she was a career ranger. She understood the logic of gathering more data before mobilizing resources. "Fine. But if anything escalates, anything at all, you request backup immediately. Understand?" "Understood." Over the next week, I found no additional prints, heard no more vocalizations. The absence of signs was almost more unsettling than their presence had been. I fell into a routine of compulsive checking. I'd walk the perimeter of the cabin twice daily. I'd hike sections of the trails looking for tracks. I'd spend hours on the lake in the small Park Service canoe, examining the far shoreline. Nothing. Complete silence from whatever had circled my home. On the 8th day, I got the radio call about the missing hiker. A group of 4 had started a multi-day backpacking trip on the northern border of the park, outside my jurisdiction but adjacent to it. One member, a woman named Valencia, had separated from the group on the evening of the first day. The other 3 had assumed she was in another tent, sleeping. It wasn't until morning that they realized she wasn't with the group and hadn't left a note. Park Search and Rescue had begun a grid pattern, and Morrison was requesting that I check the southern sections of the missing person's likely travel route, as the borders were undefined and the hiker could have easily drifted into my management area. "Can you start immediately?" Morrison asked. "I'm at the cabin. Can be in the field within an hour. Search radius is 5 miles from the last known contact point. We're treating this as urgent. Weather's holding, but conditions can change fast." "Copy that. I'm heading out." I packed a larger rucksack with emergency supplies, brought my rifle, extra ammunition, flares, water, rations, and a personal locator beacon. I took a paper map and marked the coordinates Morrison had given me. Then I locked the cabin and headed north, into the higher elevation sections where the trail forked toward the disputed area. The search would take the rest of the day. I moved at a steady pace, calling Valencia's name periodically, looking for any sign of disturbance. Overturned rocks, broken branches, discarded items. The forest at higher elevation was beautiful and utterly indifferent. Ancient trees towered in near silence. Smaller wildlife scattered at my approach. Birds sang. Everything seemed normal, except for the underlying tension that had been present since the night I heard the vocalizing. I was approximately 3 miles into the search when I found her. She was in a small clearing just off a switchback, sitting at the base of a large tree. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong. Her posture was too rigid. She wasn't moving. I approached with caution, my hand on the rifle. "Valencia, Park Service, are you hurt?" She didn't respond. She didn't move. As I got closer, I could see that her eyes were open, staring at something I couldn't perceive. Her breathing was shallow but present, alive, aware maybe, but not responsive. "Can you hear me?" I checked her vitals. Pulse was rapid but steady, no apparent injuries. Her hands were ice cold, despite the relatively warm afternoon. Her pupils were dilated, and her eyes tracked my movement, but she made no attempt to speak or acknowledge my presence. I called it in. Found the missing hiker. Location is approximately 3.2 miles north of station. Subject is alive but unresponsive. Possible psychological trauma or exposure. Requesting immediate medical evacuation. Copy. EMS is staging at the North Fork trailhead. Can you move her? She's not injured physically. I'm going to try. Getting Valencia to stand required significant effort. She was conscious but utterly passive, not resisting but not cooperating. I essentially had to support her full weight as I guided her back toward the trail. She moved like someone walking in deep sleep, her feet following the terrain, but without any real engagement with the process. It took 2 hours to get her to the trailhead where the EMS unit was waiting. The paramedics examined her immediately, their expressions growing more concerned as they ran through their protocols. "She's not responsive to verbal stimulus," one of them, a woman with kind but tired eyes, reported. "No signs of physical trauma. Vitals are elevated but stable. We're going to transport her to the hospital in Kalispell for psychiatric evaluation." "Did she say anything?" I asked. "Before I found her? No." "And she didn't try to follow you out of the forest? You had to guide her step by step?" "Yes." The paramedic exchanged a look with her partner. "That's concerning. Exposure-related trauma, maybe. We'll know more once the doctors examine her." But there was something in her expression that suggested she believed it was more than that. Something had happened to Valencia in those hours she was lost in the forest. Something had broken whatever functions allowed a person to interact with the world. I filed the incident report with Morrison that evening. She was satisfied with the outcome. Hiker found, no injuries, recovery expected. But she also made a note about my observations of Valencia's psychological state, flagging it for the hospital's attention. After I hung up with Morrison, I sat on the cabin deck and listened to the forest. The sun was setting. The light was that particular shade of amber that comes on long days in northern latitudes when evening is reluctant to transform fully into night. Somewhere in the distance, a wood thrush sang. Otherwise, silence. I thought about Valencia sitting at the base of that tree, her eyes open and aware, but her consciousness somewhere else entirely. I thought about the wrong prints on my deck. I thought about the sound in the night that didn't match anything in the park's official wildlife documentation, and I thought about something the locals had mentioned when I first arrived, something I'd dismissed as folklore. The old Blackfeet stories about skinwalkers, beings that could wear the shape of animals but weren't animals at all, things that hunted humans but moved like predators, things that couldn't be tracked because they didn't follow normal patterns. I'd dismissed it because I was a scientist, because I understood wildlife management and animal behavior, because I'd learned that the unknown could always be explained by conventional biology. That night, I stayed awake. The cabin was locked. The lights were on. The rifle was loaded, and I waited to hear that sound again. The marks appeared on the third night. I was watching the lake from the window when I noticed them on the glass, not outside scratches but inside, as if something had been pressed against the interior pane. 5 parallel marks like claw strikes. I checked the entire cabin. There were no corresponding damage marks on the outside of any window, no broken glass, no evidence of impact. Just those 5 marks on the interior of the window over my sink, as if something had scratched from inside the cabin I knew I'd locked. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent the hours before dawn on my maps, plotting the locations of the tracks I'd found. Northern shore, eastern shore, my deck. The points formed a rough pattern, a route that seemed to trace the perimeter of my position, getting closer with each appearance. The most recent marks were inside the cabin, which meant the distance had gone from approximate feet to proximity that required breaking the barrier between inside and outside. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, and that meant consulting the one resource I'd been avoiding. The ranger station for the broader park area was staffed by 5 people, including Morrison. One of them was a resource officer named Marcus Whitehorse, a member of the Blackfeet Nation who'd worked for the park for nearly 20 years. He'd mentioned during my orientation that he had expertise in traditional ecological knowledge. Basically, he knew the old stories and could contextualize them within modern wildlife management. I made a call. I need to talk to someone about historical wildlife documentation and any non-conventional animal reports in the park, I said when Marcus answered. Would you have time this week? I could drive up, Marcus said. What's this about? Unusual tracks. Unusual vocalizing. Possible large predator that doesn't match standard species identification. There was a pause. You want to run it by me in person or on the radio? The fact that he understood that I wanted privacy told me something. Marcus had worked here long enough to understand what questions meant what things. In person, I said. He arrived the next afternoon, a lean man in his early 60s with long dark hair pulled back in a braid and weathered features that suggested a lifetime outdoors. He took one look at my photographs of the tracks and went very quiet. Where did you find these? He asked. I showed him the mapped locations. He studied them for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at me directly. How much do you know about skinwalker stories? He asked. The Navajo ones. Shapeshifters that wear animal skins? Not just Navajo. The Blackfeet have similar traditions. Different names, but the same concept. Humans who can take animal form. More accurately, humans who learn how to become predators. They're not mystical creatures, not supernatural in the way people imagine. They're just people who've crossed certain lines. Who've learned things about themselves that most humans never access. I felt my skepticism rising. That's folklore. It is, Marcus agreed. It's also consistent documentation over centuries, across multiple cultures, across the whole continent. Some documentation predates recorded history, some is from last year. People report things they see, and sometimes patterns emerge across the reports. What kind of patterns? Marcus pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket. Tracks that don't match known animals, movement patterns that suggest intelligence combined with animal capability, vocalizing that's unidentifiable, predation behavior that seems deliberately cautious. And often, before documented attacks, people report finding them in liminal spaces, doorways, windows, thresholds, places between inside and outside. My stomach contracted. I thought about the window marks. There haven't been attacks in Glacier, Marcus continued. But there have been reports of unusual activity over the years, missing hikers in areas with no accessible descent, people found unresponsive, unable to process what happened to them, animals killed in patterns that don't indicate predation for food, and tracks. Why hasn't this been formally documented? I asked. Why is this not in any official report? Because it doesn't fit categories that government agencies recognize, Marcus said. You can write reports about unknown canines or undocumented migrations. You can't write reports about things that don't fit biological reality. So the incidents get filed under miscellaneous, unusual wildlife activity, possible human predation, but never what they might actually be, which is a remnant population of humans who've learned to become something else, something that hunts like an animal but thinks like a human predator. They're territorial. They're aware of human settlement, and when humans come into their territory, especially alone, they investigate. Sometimes they test. Sometimes they prey. I wanted to dismiss him, but the marks on my window had been inside the cabin. Inside, what do they want? I asked. From what the old stories say, territory, food, but also acknowledgement. They exist in a space that most humans don't recognize. When someone does recognize them, when someone sees the pattern instead of dismissing it, that changes the dynamic. They're being witnessed, not as myth, but as actual threat. How do I deal with that? Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lake. You convince them to leave, or you evacuate. There's no middle path with territorial predators who've achieved this level of capability. Either they decide your presence isn't worth the attention, or you become part of their normal resource acquisition. After Marcus left, I sat with that assessment. Territorial predators, the prints forming a perimeter, the increasing proximity, Valencia unresponsive in the forest as if her consciousness had been literally hunted from her body. These things were consistent with predatory behavior, just predatory behavior that had evolved far beyond anything documented in conventional wildlife science. I radioed Morrison. I need to request temporary evacuation, I said. Personal safety concern. I want another ranger up here within 24 hours, and I want formal documentation that I'm raising a human safety flag. What's happened? Morrison's voice was sharp with concern now. Unusual activity that suggests a behavioral pattern inconsistent with established parameters. I can't categorize it accurately, but the concentration of events indicates escalating interest in my location. I'm dispatching a ranger now. You want to evacuate immediately? Part of me did. The part that still understood the value of continued living. But another part, the part that had been growing since I arrived, understood that running would only extend the problem. The thing or things that were circling the cabin would follow. Predators understood territory, and I'd claimed this cabin as mine. That made it a claimed resource, a prize worth contesting. I'll wait for backup, I said. But I want it clear in the record. Understood. Stay alert. Help is inbound. That night I heard it again. The vocalizing, closer than before. This time it sounded almost celebratory, as if the arrival of another ranger had been anticipated, as if I'd been the bait, and the trap was still opening. The ranger who arrived was named Devon, a woman in her early 30s with the kind of steady competence that comes from growing up in the mountains. She'd worked at Glacier for 4 years and had never reported anything unusual. She thought my concerns were probably overblown. Track misidentification happens, she said, looking at my photographs. Sometimes bears press their paws in weird ways. Sometimes wolves travel with an unusual gait due to injury. The vocalization might have been a distressed elk or a moose in rut. These things compound in an empty mind. It was the last phrase that caught me. Empty mind. As if solitude had a degrading effect on cognition. Maybe it did. Maybe I was making patterns where none existed. But the window marks were still there. I showed them to Devon. Her skepticism faltered. How did that get on the inside of the window? I don't know, I said. I locked the cabin. There's no evidence of forced entry. Devon examined the window more carefully. Could this be old? From before you arrived? Could be, I conceded. I didn't photograph the window condition on arrival day, but we both knew I was lying. I would have noticed marks like that immediately. And I wanted Devon to believe I was potentially unreliable, because if she thought I was unreliable, and then something happened, at least the incident would be documented as suspect from the start. We agreed to do a joint patrol of the area, covering the locations where I'd found tracks. The day was clear and bright, the kind of June day that makes wilderness seem inviting rather than threatening. We hiked the perimeter, photographing any unusual marks or disturbances. Devon found something I'd missed. Near the southern approach to the cabin, partially hidden by brush, was a kill site. The remains of a mountain goat. Not fresh, the carcass had been there for several days, long enough for decay to be substantial. But the kill pattern was unusual. What do you make of this? I asked Devon. She crouched near the remains, not touching anything. Predation. Large predator. But the throat isn't torn, the abdomen isn't open for organ extraction. It's almost like the animal was killed just for the sake of the kill, which suggests a predator that wasn't hungry, just testing its capability. We documented the site and continued the patrol. By the time we completed the circuit and returned to the cabin, the light was already shifting toward evening. The short nights of June were approaching their minimum, but darkness would still come eventually. I'm going to sleep in the second bedroom tonight, Devon said, rather than heading back to West Glacier. Safer to have backup on site. That night, we both heard it. Vocalizing started around 3 in the morning. Long, sustained notes that didn't match any animal call I could identify. There was something almost musical about it, as if whatever was making the sound understood the concept of pitch and was deliberately varying it. Devon was out of her room within seconds, rifle in hand. We stood in the dark kitchen, listening as the sound moved around the cabin. Methodical, circling. The way you'd walk around an object you were sizing up. What the hell is that? Devon whispered. Unknown predator, I said. Possibly multiple individuals. Territory behavior, but it was singular. I was certain of it. Whatever was out there was one creature, moving alone. Which somehow made it worse. The vocalizing continued for nearly an hour, slowly receding toward the forest. Then it stopped. The silence that followed seemed to contain weight. In the morning we evacuate, Devon said. Both of us. This goes to the State Wildlife Office. This goes to Fish and Game. This goes somewhere that has the resources to deal with what we can't identify. I didn't argue. We packed while we waited for daylight, throwing essentials into rucksacks. When the sky began to lighten, we prepared the cabin for extended absence, securing windows, turning off propane, leaving a note about suspicious activity for the next ranger rotation. Then we headed south on foot, covering terrain quickly but carefully, constantly alert. It was around midday when we found Valencia's camping group. The search had been called off when she was found, but her group had stayed to assist with searches and also to cope with what had happened. They were camped near the northernmost marked trail, waiting for the formal incident to close. One of them, a man named Robert, came to meet us as we approached. "The ranger?" he asked. "Have you found anything else? Any evidence of what happened to Valencia?" "She was found disoriented but physically unharmed," I said. "The hospital is handling evaluation. Has she contacted any of you since admission?" "No, and the hospital won't release information because we're not family. But another member of our group, a woman named Iris, she disappeared this morning. She was here at dawn, and now she's gone. Her tent is still here. All her gear is still here. She just vanished." My stomach dropped. I looked at Devon. She looked back with the same realization. Two missing hikers, both women, both in the same location, days apart. Not a pattern of transient predation, a targeted acquisition. "When did she disappear?" Devon asked. "Between midnight and 6 a.m. We all went to sleep around 11. We were going to make a final radio check-in today, then head out. When we woke up, Iris was gone." "We need to initiate formal search," I said. "And we need to expand it beyond the normal radius. I think this is connected to the activity I've been documenting." Devon got on the radio. Morrison answered within moments. As Devon explained the situation, I watched the forest. The same forest that had taken Valencia's consciousness. The same forest that was now claiming another person. "We're mobilizing a full search team," Morrison said. "ETA is 4 hours. You and Addison secure the campsite and conduct an immediate proximity search. Look for any signs of struggle, tracks, anything that might indicate direction of travel." We searched in a widening circle around the camp. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no discarded items. It was as if Iris had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only her material possessions. By the time the larger search team arrived, the day was fading. Morrison came in person, grim and focused. She had 6 rangers with her, along with 2 volunteers who specialized in wilderness search methodology. "Brief me on everything," Morrison said to me. I laid out the full sequence, the tracks, the vocalizing, the window marks, the kill site, the 2 disappearances in close proximity, the pattern that suggested deliberate acquisition rather than random predation. Morrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You think this is a known predator that's been previously documented?" she asked. "I think," I said carefully, "that the pattern of behavior is consistent with a large, intelligent predator that understands human settlement and is deliberately targeting human subjects. The specificity and the escalation suggest territorial establishment combined with resource acquisition. And the missing hikers, I think they were taken. I think whatever is taking them has a reason. And I think if we don't understand what we're dealing with, it won't stop." Morrison made a decision. "We're establishing a base camp here. Formal search grid for Iris will begin at dawn. I'm requesting state assistance and wildlife expert consultation. In the meantime, no one travels alone. Everyone stays in groups of at least 2, and everyone is armed." The search team tried to find Iris over the next 2 days. They found nothing. The forest had claimed her as completely as it had claimed Valencia's consciousness. On the evening of the 2nd day, I asked if I could speak to Morrison privately. "I want to request permanent transfer," I said. "I want to leave the park." Morrison looked tired. She'd barely slept since arriving. "This isn't your fault. You documented everything correctly, you flagged the activity, you brought in resources, but it came with me, didn't it? The moment I arrived at the cabin, the activity escalated. Valencia disappeared, then Iris. It's hunting in response to my presence. If you leave, it follows," Morrison finished. "Which is why I can't let you go. I need you here to help establish what we're dealing with. But I'm bringing in outside resources, specialists who deal with predator behavior outside normal parameters." That night, the vocalizing came again, but this time it sounded different. Satisfied, maybe. Or complete. As if some cycle had finished. The sound was distant, moving away from the camp, toward the higher elevations, toward the territory that belonged to the park's most remote sections. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to that satisfied vocalization retreat into the dark, and I understood something fundamental. The thing that had circled my cabin wasn't just a predator. It was intelligent. It was testing. It was learning the boundaries of human response, learning what kind of prey we were, learning whether we could hurt it or whether we were simply another resource to be utilized. And now that it had established dominance, had taken what it wanted, it was letting us know that the exchange had been completed. The hunting season for the moment was over, but the territory was still claimed. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. The State Wildlife Office brought in specialists. They brought in forensic anthropologists and behavioral ecologists. They brought in tracking experts and dogs trained to find human remains. They found nothing. No trace of iris. No evidence that would explain the disappearances using conventional criminal or biological frameworks. There were theories. Predatory human involvement. A disoriented hiker who'd wandered into terrain she couldn't navigate. An animal attack so severe that the remains were scattered beyond recovery. But none of them fit the evidence we'd documented. The specificity of the disappearances. The pattern. The tracks that remained throughout. A constant reminder that we were being observed. Valencia was released from psychiatric observation after 2 weeks. She hadn't recovered her memories of the night she was missing. She described being in the forest, being aware of movement around her, and then a break in her consciousness. When she woke, she was being examined by paramedics. There was a gap that her mind refused to access or process. The park eventually settled on a decision: close the northern section to through hiking, reroute trails, establish the area as wildlife research territory, closed to public access. It was a practical solution that acknowledged something was wrong without requiring that we explain what that something was. By late July, the official investigation was wound down. The state experts left. The search teams dispersed. Morrison approved my transfer request. Not out of the park, but to a new position coordinating remote ranger stations for the entire region. It was effectively a promotion that also functioned as an evacuation. But before I left, I went back to the cabin one final time. I stood on the deck, looking out at Kintla Lake. The water was calm, reflecting the mountains that bordered the northern horizon. It was beautiful here. Brutally, indifferently beautiful. The kind of place that didn't care about the small crises of human consciousness. I thought about why I'd come here, to disappear, to escape the life that had become unbearable after my wife's death, to find some kind of refuge in isolation and wilderness. And I'd found something, just not what I'd expected. The cabin had witnesses, not the kind that would testify in court or provide evidence that would convince skeptics, but witnesses nonetheless, beings that existed in the forest, that had their own territorial claims and their own predatory requirements, beings that understood the difference between human intrusion and human acceptance, the difference between a person passing through and a person trying to take refuge. I'd come here to hide from human connection. The forest had taught me that isolation isn't actually possible. There's always another consciousness present, always something watching, always the possibility of becoming prey if you forget that you're living on someone else's land. I locked the cabin and left the key in the designated location for the next ranger. I didn't look back as I walked south toward the checkpoint where Morrison was waiting to drive me to the regional office. 6 months later, I was in a different cabin, positioned in the eastern sector near Many Glacier. Different territory, different mountains, different predators, presumably, though I never confirmed this. I'd never heard the vocalizing again, never found new tracks, never experienced that sense of being sized up and evaluated. But sometimes, on cold nights when I was alone and the wind was moving through the peaks, I'd hear something that might have been an echo, something that might have been a memory, something that might have been a reminder. The official report stated that the missing hikers had been lost to the wilderness through misadventure and terrain navigation failure. No animal was ever identified. No evidence was ever conclusively documented. The case files were closed, but the territory remained contested, and I remained aware, in a way I hadn't been before I arrived at Kintla Lake, that humans are not the apex consciousness in wilderness areas. We are visitors, temporary inhabitants, resource users, and if we forget that, if we think we can claim territory that has been claimed by other intelligences for longer than we've been capable of thought, then we become part of the natural order in ways we're not equipped to understand. I still work as a ranger. I still document wildlife activity and maintain trails and respond to emergencies. But I do it now with the knowledge that some patterns can't be explained, some movements can't be categorized, some disappearances can't be resolved. And sometimes, from my cabin window on quiet nights, I look out at the dark forest and I understand that I'm not really alone, that none of us ever are, that the witness is constant. The only question is what the witness wants.